What are you so worried about, son? He's gonna drop his hooves soon anyway. He won't have time to rewrite his will. It's all right. That old speech won't take you away. Just make sure you visit him in the hospital more often. Just to make sure Grandpa sees that we're taking care of him. That's all. No matter how he feels about us, we're his only family, and he'll never have another. And on his deathbed, you realize that everything is more acute than ever, including the feelings of kinship. Nancy and Charles were already rubbing their hands together. They were looking forward to the day when James would finally die. And when that day came so close, the hypocritical relatives couldn't help but cheer. Nancy knew that her father planned to divide the entire estate between her and her only son by the light in the window. But, from his youth, Charles had long been a young man of great age, but, like his mother, preferred to rest on his grandfather's laurels of other merits. Nancy encouraged her son in every possible way. He had no one nearer to him than she. The woman's husband could not boast of any outstanding results in life, and he'd married them for their father's money. Nancy had married him out of desperation after she had been abandoned by the man she loved. She no longer felt confident that she could awaken any feelings in anyone. And here he was, though not rich and not of their circle. But, as it seemed to her then, quite sincere young man. So she gave her consent to become his wife. Even though her father discouraged her from such a disadvantageous marriage. Her mother, who had been lying in the ground for several years, to tell the truth, was also not delighted with her daughter's choice. But unlike her husband, the woman knew how much grief her love had caused her, and she did not want it to happen again. Better that than to fall headlong into it, Miranda reasoned. Maybe you'll be happy with him. After all, a family is not built on love alone. The mother-in-law liked the quiet, battered character of her son-in-law. He did not demand anything, did not shake rights. Of course, in Schweriger. She realized that next to his daughter, most likely, he keeps only profit. But Mason was a man far from stupid, and realizing that he was able to fit into a good family, did not show his self-interest. They lived not so that soul to soul, but serious and irreconcilable conflicts in the family did not arise. And where would they come from? Mason depended entirely on the capital of his wife's father. He would not risk a word against her. Nancy did not try too hard to be a good wife, but in spite of that, the man was satisfied with everything. James watched with bewilderment what was happening in his family. Surely, this was not the fate he wished for his only beloved daughter, and the fact that his wife encouraged all this did not please him at all. But he tried not to say everything that was going on in his soul directly. After all, at least something, but still a family. And the daughter's life seemed to be going well, even if not in the way her father would have liked. Charles was a real gift to the family. James had already thought that his daughter would never have children. Miranda shared her husband's frustration. They just kept dragging on and on. Soon it's time to retire, and they still can't have children, lamented the man, for whom the continuation of the family was of the utmost importance. At one time, he was even ready to to divorce his wife because she could not conceive for a long time. Only when the long-awaited water came into the world, James calmed down. There's no telling whether he and Miranda would have lived together into old age or split up. And now, James was very much concerned that his daughter was approaching her third decade and that she had not become a mother, bypassing propriety and any tact. Her father had boldly questioned her about it head-on. The subject was extremely uncomfortable and painful for Nancy, but she tried her best to skirt the sharp edges, just to avoid direct conflict with her father. Her mother, as much as she could, calmed her daughter, who after every such conversation fell into tears. Not taking it to heart, she said. Well, that's the kind of man he is. He wants an heir or heiress. It is of the utmost importance to him that his line should be continued. There's nothing to be done about it. Nancy was very much worried about it herself. All sorts of unpleasant thoughts were going through the woman's head. Had God punished me for the sins of my youth, she reasoned? Would he never send me a child? Only Mason cared nothing for children. The man was indifferent to the fact of them. He was quite satisfied with the comfortable life that his wife provided him, at the expense of her father's assets. The old man was not going to die yet too young. Therefore, the man could not worry about the near future. Would he and Nancy have children or not? And would they have children at all? The man was not at all interested. From time to time, he even caught himself thinking that he was glad they were gone. If they had children, their whole life would revolve entirely around them.
Yes, and sleepless nights, diapers, illnesses, diapers. All this was, and Mason was not at all easier. Therefore, when the man learned that his wife finally got pregnant, he was more upset than happy, but tried to hide it in every possible way.
He could not openly demonstrate his feelings to his wife, who dreamed of a child. Letting her father know that was out of the question. James didn't treat his son-in-law in the best possible way, and never hid it. Married Provence. He was indignant when the daughter Mason or Catholics got married, and Miranda or looked somewhere. I, of course, busy up to my ears in business, but was also always close to his daughter. Couldn't you talk her out of it? The woman tried to avoid the subject by changing it to something else. Unlike her husband, she knew much more about Nancy's life. Therefore, when her daughter decided to join her fate with this blind and unemployed man, she did not interfere. On the contrary, she even approved of this choice. She was glad that her daughter, in a heart that was broken into small shards, was able to pick herself up at all and start a new life. James did not catch those terrible events that took place in the life of young Nancy, when she barely crossed the threshold of the Institute. He was at that time in a long departure. The man had long dreamed of expansion, dreamed of increasing his capitals. And now, when his daughter grew up and received her high school diploma, he decided to leave home for 2 whole years. I hope you can manage without me, he sighed sadly. James had never been away from his family for so long. If he hadn't left, then maybe what happened to Nancy wouldn't have happened. The man had always been very strict with his daughter, and not only raised her within the bounds of propriety, but also controlled Nancy's every move. When her father left, she felt freer and realized that she could afford to do things she would never have dared to do before when her father lived at home. As soon as her father left, Nancy plunged into the thick of student life, and her mother didn't see fit to prevent it. After all, the thing is young. If you restrict everything, it will only get worse. So, reasoned Miranda, who never said a word to her daughter when she came home at Warrior. And so it went on until Nancy fell into the trap of her own love. Thereafter, they tried not to bring it up. Miranda took her daughter's secret to the grave, and her father never found out what kind of life his Olenka led. While he was away, the affairs of bygone days, after which she could hardly recover and continue to live on. Marriage to Mason was no salvation for Nancy, but it was better than if she had been alone. And to tell the truth, young people did not stand in line with marriage proposals. So, as they say, better a bird in the hand than a crane in the sky. By nature, Mason was a quiet and reserved person. He grew up in a very poor family. His father and mother did not love his son, considered him a burden, and constantly blamed him for all their troubles and problems. Of course, if his mother had caught up with the pregnancy in time, Mason would not have been born at all. We can say that he was born completely by accident, and solely because his mother had no other choice. His parents didn't even come to the wedding. In fact, It's unlikely he would have invited them. By that time, his father and mother were already completely down to the bottom of life alcoholics, with whom it is a shame to appear in decent society. He never told Nancy about his family, and she never asked. Only James was very wary of the fact that Mason did not know with his parents. What kind of son is he who wants to know his parents and doesn't? He reasoned when it came to that. Where's that been seen? They are relatives. They are relatives to accept them as they are and to be by their side both in sorrow and in joy. But the man was not allowed to rant on the subject for long. Miranda always changed the subject if she was present. Nancy tried to shrug off such conversations so as not to get into an unpleasant debate with her father, both for her and for him. Time passed, and gradually James became reconciled to his daughter's choice. Of course, he was still skeptical about his son-in-law, but still, if for so many years he had never once shown himself on the bad side, the man had hope that he really is a decent man. And when his grandson was born, James focused entirely on him. He pinned all his hopes on Charles. When he grows up, he'll be sure to continue my work, he said. Not like you lazy bums. Nancy and Mason could not find their place in the sun, and tired of defecting from job to job, tightly settled on the farther Father sava the purpose into her father's neck. They didn't understand why they had they had to labor at all, nor why James had never made them full shareholders in his company either. Nancy hoped he'd bring it up sooner or later. After all, she and Mason had been married so many years, and her father wasn't getting any younger. To whom she'd put her capital? She reasoned every time it came up with her mother. I don't understand why he hasn't asked Mason to be a part of his business yet. He doesn't plan on working the rest of his life. I mean, that's not healthy enough. And Mason's been out of work for years. Father has already said that he doesn't see your husband as a worthy successor. Mother sighed. Nor you. He's waiting for Charles to grow up, because he's sure he can pass on his business to him. Well, you and Mason are just going to have to live with it. As long as James is relatively young, why shouldn't he work on his own? And when his grandson grows up, he'll be old enough to put the business in good hands. And at the end of the day, why are you so embarrassed? He's never refused you money, has he? He built you a beautiful house. Live happily ever after. Business, daughter. It's not easy. You don't need it, believe me. Live while you can. And when your grandson grows up, we'll see. James had such high hopes for his grandson that he didn't even have the courage to admit to himself that they were not justified. Charles grew up even lazier and more detached than his parents, Like his father and mother, he was used to living on everything ready-made, did not strive for anything, and was sure that he did not need to achieve anything in life. The young man graduated from school, during which he caused his parents a lot of problems.
However, not his father, not his mother, did not care about this absolutely nothing. All the troubles ruined grandfather, who by that time, although he was already quite old and weak in health, but could not allow anything bad to happen to his grandson. James could not find the strength to cross Charles out of the will, even though he realized that nothing good would come out of it. Why don't you want to go to school?
Grandpa asked his grandson, hoping to hear at least a coherent answer. But instead of explaining James his position in life, instilled in him from childhood by his parents, which consisted in his conviction of a life without poverty. By birthright, Charles looked down and made a guilty face. His father and mother had taught him that too, and he had learned their lessons well. Under no circumstances should you ever try to show him that you expect to live on his money for the rest of your life. On the mustache hair Nancy, who herself at one time in company with her husband successfully pretended to plan to work and realize. There will come a moment when he will leave you alone with his questions. That's one thing. Secondly, Grandpa was old, and the only thing that mattered now was that he should make a will for us. However, the notary's notation of the word Charanarkisariat Shams had ceased to be of any importance after Miranda's death. Nancy was his only daughter, and, as a consequence, the only heir already to his son. Surely she would never hurt him or leave him in the lurch. Charles had been a real light in the window for her. She never tired of thanking fate for him. The woman literally prayed for this child, and of course wished him a trouble-free, prosperous life, which was possible only with the help of Capital James. He so all his life and maintained an unemployed daughter. Either out of spite of character, or because there was no one dearer in the world, beloved man could not throw them off his neck. And his wife in her lifetime did nothing but press on pity. I'm not going to give up, James reasoned, when he thought about the fact that his whole family were lazy wastrels. After all, I'm not giving them the last of my money. I've earned it all my life. God bless each and every one of them, so let the kids have a decent life. Otherwise, what's it all for? Both Nancy and Mason brazenly took advantage of their grandfather's kind-heartedness and taught their son the same thing. Charleska was a piece of fruit, a gift you wouldn't wish on an enemy. The young man's reckless behavior was solely the fault of his father and mother, but they would never admit it. Nancy thought her son was perfect, and Mason didn't care much for him. When did James have his first serious health problems? Nancy hoped his father was about to go to heaven. By then, their relationship had deteriorated dramatically. The father, Tertirar, became old, grumpy, and only did that regularly reproached his daughter for improper upbringing of his grandson. Raised on my head? James resented it. Wage earners like yourself. You and your fiancé have been on my back all your life. Now your grandson's all grown up, and I had such hopes for him, such hopes that in the end it turned out. But nothing good. He eats, sleeps, and does nothing of any use. And he's not going to be any good. It's obvious. Or do you think I'm stupid and don't realize that? Her son's future was in jeopardy, and the woman felt it more keenly than ever. Up to this point, there had been no suggestion that she might be left without a paternal inheritance, and therefore Charles was at risk of being left with nothing. But the older James grew, the more acutely he felt that he had not lived his life in vain. The man realized that his daughter and grandson are ungrateful pigs who only need money from him, and even seriously considered leaving all his fortune to some charitable foundation. Nancy couldn't let that happen, but what do you propose to do, mother? Asked Charles, who understood what was happening and feared for his future as much as Nancy did. Not poison him, really. No, of course that's an option, and it might not be a bad one. But we could get in a hell of a lot of trouble for it. And I don't want to end up in jail for nothing. I thought you and I were planning on living rich, not doing a lot of time. Naturally, Nancy never thought of anything like that. She hoped that everything would just happen, naturally, by itself. After all, her father was already old and in poor health. Every day his health was getting worse and worse, which gave the woman hope that all the problems would be resolved soon. When James was admitted to the hospital, mother and son rejoiced. Finally, Nancy thought to herself with delight. No way. Well, whether the grandfather survived or not. Age takes its toll anyway. She had never been particularly fond of her father, but throughout her life she had carefully concealed his strict upbringing and his irresistible desire to make everyone around her dance to his tune. Drew Nancy out of himself and knocked out of the rut. In her childhood and adolescent years, she had been very afraid of him. There, don't go there. Don't do that. Those words still echoed in her head. If it had not been for her mother, Nancy would probably have run away from home. She had always thought of her father as a despot and a tyrant. And only Miranda was capable of smoothing out the sharp edges that could have been a stumbling block in their relationship. Nancy smiled at him to his face, but hated him behind his eyes. James did not know about the events of bygone days, which he had not witnessed by the fortunate chance of Nancy's absence. If he had known, she was more than sure he would have left nothing on her. Good thing he wouldn't have buried her in the ground. But fortunately for James, it was all a secret that would never have been revealed to him if it hadn't been for a ridiculous but fatal accident. You probably had the hell to take him to this hospital. Nancy resented it when her father had already given his soul to God. The woman blamed Charles for the circumstances. It was the first time she had ever allowed herself to speak to her son in such a tone and reproach him for anything. Up to this point, the woman had never raised her voice to Charles, let alone confronted him about anything. You should have left him at home, she continued. Let him change in his bedroom in peace, and none of this would have happened. On the day that James became very ill, Charles was the only one at home. Nancy is off to the beauty parlor, and Mason is hungry for shopping as usual. Grandson. Springs! Help me! Baptized grandfather, who only managed to reach his grandson Charles from the third time. He heard him peasants from the room, not immediately, but very much frightened, immediately came running to help. What's wrong with you? Grandfather, making a caring appearance, asked the young man. Where does it hurt? Heart? Confused, mumbled James, who had never felt such severe pain in his life. Give me some water, please. Call an ambulance. Charles was confused, and shoving a glass of water into his grandfather's hands, he began to think quickly about what to do next. He didn't want to call an ambulance because if the heart attack was so severe that James couldn't even move, it was very likely that he would die. And that would be to his and his mother's advantage. But, on the other hand, what if we are blamed for his death? Charles, who was afraid of going to jail, thought with horror. They'd find something to blame. That we didn't call an ambulance in time, that we didn't help him. I wonder if that could happen or not. Charles was a completely uneducated man, so he couldn't understand such subtleties. That's why he made a fatal mistake of not calling his mother, who was too busy to pick up the phone. Charles did call an ambulance. Grandfather's condition was worsening by the minute. He was trying to scream. His body was making strange noises. All this made Charles uncomfortable, and the ambulance did not hurry to arrive. When the young man realized that he was unlikely to wait for the doctors, he picked up the barely lying grandfather on his arm and, carefully placing him on the back seat of the car, he himself took him to the hospital. Never before in his life had Charles driven so fast, huh? At that moment, the young man thought only of one thing. If only his grandfather had not dropped his skates before he arrived at the hospital. It wouldn't matter so much there, but he wouldn't have anything to charge him with. When the surmer var quite coiler, the doctor saw the patient's condition. He was horrified. James was put on a gurney and wheeled away. Charles remained in the hallway completely confused, not realizing that he had made a huge mistake bringing his grandfather to the hospital. Why did you do it? Whispered the mother, who immediately called her son back as soon as she finished the procedures in the salon. Who asked you to do it? Why didn't you leave him at home? I didn't want to be blamed for his death and go to jail. Charles, trying to justify myself. Don't you understand? I was home alone with him. It's not a big deal. You never know. And Nancy threatened. You're like the village, Charles, honestly. But the ambulance didn't arrive in time. A man died. So what now? Do you know how many cases like this happen every day? And that everyone who was near their relatives at that moment is blamed for their death? Are you stupid? Or is he pretending to be? Well, now they're going to drag him out, and there's no telling how long we'll have to wait for him to die. Charles, do you realize you've ruined everything? Don't you have enough to be angry about? The woman was right. The old man was indeed resuscitated. And when the doctor told her and Charles, they were shocked. We tried to make as happy a face as possible, so we wouldn't give ourselves away. Mother and son returned home, in a disgusted mood. Nancy did not know what to do next. She saw only one way out of the situation, to visit the old man and play their quarreling daughter and grandson, so that, God forbid, he would not have any bad thoughts in his head. And if he recovers and is released from the hospital? Charles asked. What then? Grandpa's old, of course, but people live to be 90 or even 100. Who knows? How many years do we have to wait for the inheritance? Shut up, barked Mother. You've ruined everything yourself. There's no telling how it would have ended if you hadn't called that damn ambulance. Maybe he'd be dead by now. Now we'll visit, pretend to care about him. I don't think he'll be discharged. He's too weak, and the heart's a thing. He could have another attack at any time. You know that. Charles had no idea what his mother was implying. To be more precise, he didn't want to think badly of her. Nancy herself, would hardly dare to take extreme measures. The woman planned to stay close to her father's dress, talking to him and watching his train of thought. She realized that he was weak, and therefore in need of care and concern. And who, if not close relatives, will put his shoulder in a difficult moment? To quarrel with them, James Fyodorovich was obviously unprofitable, and Nancy counted onto the fact that after all that had happened, her father would forget his ridiculous delusions about the will. He would be afraid that he would be all alone and would not dare to rewrite it. Although, on the other hand, he can afford to hire a nurse. The man has enough money to pay for her services. Damn it, the idiot thought of that. Charles' Nancy continued to berate Charles. She had never expected her son to be so unconscionable. Stupidity. As soon as his father came to his senses, she received a call from the hospitals, and the woman rushed there. Nancy needed to know exactly what condition her father was in, and what the doctor's prognosis was. So on arrival, she went straight to his office. Your father has a very weak heart, the doctor sighed. We've barely got him out of this grief. If he had been brought in a few minutes later, it is unlikely that we would have been able to save him. He will have to be under observation for a while. You realize he's not a very old man. And an attack. It could happen again at any time. And he mustn't be nervous. I'd advise him to leave everything to rest. I understand your father is still working. Yes, he has his own business, the woman replied. It's impossible to make him leave the business. He can't imagine his life without work. What can you do? The doctor grinned. We're not all old, but I'd still advise you to keep a regimen. James needs complete rest. We'll keep him here for a week, observe him, and if everything is fine, we'll discharge him. Nancy went straight to her father's room. Strange as it may seem, he behaved quite friendly to her, and seemed even glad of her visit. They did not bring up any sharp topics that would have excited them both, and might have provoked a conflict. They talked about this and that. The woman was doing her best to be a caring daughter, trying to put the old man's vigilance to sleep, and did not even realize that James had not changed his attitude to her and her grandson. And after what had happened to him, it had only gotten worse. For the first time in years, the man realized that he was damn lonely. Neither his daughter nor his grandson needed him, and now she'd only come to the hospital to placate him. If James had previously preferred to deceive himself, turning a blind eye to the reality that surrounded him, it made absolutely no sense now that he was almost on his deathbed. No matter how unfortunate it was for him to realize it, but both his daughter and grandson are complete egoists who don't care about anything except money. At that moment, the old man felt it more acutely than ever. But he did not want to quarrel with his daughter, so he pretended that everything was all right and did not touch the old disagreements and conflicts. But he would have to think about the will while he was still alive. James realized that as well as the fact that with such a state of health, he was unlikely to last long. He wasn't old enough. He might have left his fortune to a charity that he was more interested in than any other, had he not met her, a young woman, seeing whom the man had so many questions for both his late wife and daughter. He realized that it could not be a mere coincidence, but he did not dare to question Nancy. And what would she tell him? Advice was cheap. Especially when it came to such a sensitive matter, James decided to find out through his own channels. He had someone the man could trust as himself. As soon as he regained consciousness, he immediately called him and asked him to come to the hospital for a serious conversation. Benjamin arrived the same day, and after listening to James, promised to find out everything as soon as possible. As soon as she entered his room, the man immediately opened his eyes wide with surprise. "My God!" he thought to himself. "What resemblance!" It even seemed to James that his daughter was standing in front of him, only a few decades younger. The girl looked to be about 25 or 30 years old. The man couldn't tell her age for sure. She looked young, but she was hardly as young as she seemed at first glance. After all, she had been in medical school for 6 years. He wondered how long she'd been working here. James was so deep in his own thoughts that he didn't even hear the nurse's request. "Sleeve. If you want it, please," she said. "I need an injection." Not receiving a response, the stranger waited a few minutes, then injured the patient by the shoulder. "Can you hear me?" she clarified. "You feel bad? Maybe call a doctor?" "Oh, I'm sorry," recalled James. "I, the old fool, just thought and did not hear what you asked to do." "Can you say that again?" "I apologize again for the way it came out. I'll be more careful in the future." "That's all right," the nurse smiled. "Would you like a sleeve?" "Yes, right away," James answered. He was staring at her so intently that Molly thought something was wrong. But she didn't dare ask. It seemed to her that it would be impolite to reproach a sick person for looking at her in some wrong way. What right had she to do that? The nurse left the room, and as soon as the door closed behind her, James dialed Benjamin's number. Fortunately, the daughter was not going to comply with the doctor's order. On the contrary, Nancy was only thinking about how to kill her father and send him to the other world. Therefore, when James asked her to bring him a cell phone, she immediately complied with his request. Of course, she smiled. "I know you can't live a day without your business. You always have to have everything under control." He couldn't get the nurse out of his mind. He wanted to find out everything he could about her. James was not a stupid man and did not believe in such coincidences and coincidences. He knew right away that something was wrong. But when could Nancy have given birth to a daughter? He reasoned. And most importantly, why had she hidden it? And where did the girl end up after she was born? The answers to these questions were to be found, and he hoped that the information Benjamin would give him would satisfy his interest to the full. The information that Benjamin had managed to obtain exceeded James's expectations. What a despicable thing to do. He was indignant, page after page, reading what was enclosed in a large, thick folder. The man scrutinized each document given to him in detail and thoroughly. He had never experienced such a shock in his life. How could Miranda have kept all this from him? Did she fear his anger or pity for her daughter? How could they have condemned the poor girl to orphan her share? How could they have had the conscience to do so? But it all came together at once in his mind. That was exactly what he noticed when he looked at Molly's date of birth. I couldn't know about it, because I was away at the time. And when I returned, the girl's fate had already been sealed for a year. Nancy had always lacked freedom. For many years, since she was a schoolgirl, She had looked enviously at the girls of her age who did not have such strict fathers. Those girls were not controlled by anyone. They could go out with guys and make sure they didn't get paddled for it. From an old, inadequate bait who was convinced that decent girls should not have any relationship at such a young age and before marriage. She could not afford such a thing. During her school days, her father made sure she came home on time, and all her time was spent either in classes, reading books, or socializing with her mother. Nancy wasn't even allowed to stay overnight at her friends' houses, no matter what. So when she learned that her father was going away for a whole year, maybe even 2, she was glad. Nancy was sure that her mother and would not control her as much. She was a student by then. But I'm not going to be a girl until I'm 30, she thought to herself with annoyance. At school, Nancy didn't even have any girlfriends, let alone boyfriends. Relationships with the opposite sex were out of the question. James would destroy her if he found out about something like that. Miranda had a much easier time of it. She'd been severely restricted herself in her time. It was probably for this reason that she had lived her whole life with her husband, who was the first and only man in her life. From time to time, Miranda noticed how much James resembled her father. That's probably why she married him in the first place. She understood her daughter very well and shared her emotions and feelings. But Miranda could not even imagine where this freedom would lead Nancy. No, of course, she didn't go off on a wild goose chase. Still, upbringing played a part. And unlike many of her peers, Nancy could not afford to go out all day and night long and go to bed with anyone who offered. But she fell in love and trusted her lover. She thought they would spend their whole life together. Naive. When she found out he'd taken her, it was too late. Miranda didn't even scold her daughter. The woman knew it was her fault when something was too taboo. How would a young, inexperienced girl know what was happening to her? If only to guess. Didn't you notice anything at all? Just to be on the safe side, the mother clarified, as it was important for her to understand what her daughter's future plans were and what she should prepare for. It was one thing if she got knocked up and really didn't suspect anything because of a malfunction in her body, and quite another if she planned to tie her life to the father of the child and marry him. Nancy really had no idea she was pregnant. She didn't see any changes in herself, but as it happened, she was eager to tell her young man about it. She loved him very much and planned to tie her fate with him. Then, still very young and naive girl expected that he would be happy and immediately make her a marriage proposal. But the young man had completely different plans for this life, which absolutely did not coincide with what she fantasized about herself. Nancy. You and I were just taking a walk, he said indifferently. When, encouraged about the future family life, Nancy informed him that she was expecting a child. It's a young thing. It's too early for us to start a family, but think what kind of parents we are. It was too late to terminate the pregnancy. If the term had been even slightly shorter, Miranda would have insisted on this option. And it wasn't just that her father would cause scandals, trashing his daughter. It was also about Nancy's future. But who would want her with a fetus? Who would want to tie her fate to her? The only option left about the unhappy girl was to give birth and write a refusal. And when Nancy realized the inevitability of this, panicked. What would happen if her father found out? She asked her mother. No matter how much the girl hated him, she was still afraid. She realized what awaited her if James became aware of the pregnancy, and she didn't envy herself. He won't, her mother reassured her. How would he know? He's away, and at best he'll be home at the end of next year. And you'll sit tight and keep your head down. I know a doctor. I'll make a deal with her. And after you've written your refusal, you'll have nothing to do with the child. The most painful thing for Nancy was being betrayed by the man she loved. Just used and discarded like a piece of junk. Even if her mother hadn't suggested she give up this child, she still wouldn't have raised it. Nancy wanted to forget everything associated with her lover. The child would be a living reminder of how despicable he had been to her. It would be unbearable to see the baby every day and be reminded of his scumbag father. Nancy certainly couldn't bear it. It was beyond her strength. The whole situation was very risky. Miranda realized that, purely theoretically, her husband, of course, could come home early, but she really hoped that it would not happen, because then both she and her daughter would not have anything good to look forward to. James would hardly want to listen to Nancy's wails and lamentations and stories about how some asshole had betrayed her. What if he found out about it through his own channels? Don't be complacent, Nancy. Can you imagine what would happen then? Oh my God. My daughter, Miranda said. But why would he do that? To check something out? To run something through? He won't even think about you. No, he wouldn't. He'd never think his daughter could get pregnant by some guy. Have a baby? You what? Of course, if Miranda made the effort, she could find a doctor who was willing to do the forgery. Find a child for a childless family where, for example, the wife would want to cheat on her husband by passing off someone else's baby as her own. But she didn't want to scrounge up connections. Just like that, these were the kind of people who could. Blabbed to James about what had happened while he was away. That's why the woman only sought help from a doctor she was 100% sure of. Lisa will definitely keep her mouth shut. And with Miranda's husband, she had absolutely no even superficial ties through mutual acquaintances. But she categorically refused to formalize the forgery, even though the woman offered her a very impressive sum for it. No, she said sternly, the future baby would be placed in an orphanage, and there, if destined, it would find its own family. Nancy had absolutely no feelings for the newborn girl except dislike. Even though the baby looked very much like her, she still associated her with the traitor who had abandoned her. The refusal she formalized at once and knew nothing more about the fate of her child. By the time James returned home, the situation was already shaking. Nancy's wounds began to slowly heal. She forced herself to cross her former lover out of her heart, even though it was very hard for her to do so. It helped that the guy had disappeared. He never showed up at the institute. And when she came out of vacation for illness, which carefully drew her mother's acquaintance at school, he did not catch it. Listening to gossip, Nancy learned that the young man had been expelled and had gone to his small homeland. My God, she thought to herself, how lucky I am. At that moment, Nancy realized that she would not have been able to study with him at the same institute. Seeing him would have been simply unbearable. So the fact that he had been expelled was a very good thing. Nancy hoped that they would never see each other again. Had she made a vow not to fall in love? Yes, she had to get married, of course, or her father would ask uncomfortable questions. And her mother was seriously concerned about her daughter's prolonged depression. So when Mason came her way, Nancy didn't push him away. Of course, he was completely out of her league, but she was convinced that Mason was a suitable candidate for a future marriage. After such a terrible betrayal, Nancy didn't believe anyone would ever love her seriously. It was possible that Mason was attracted to her. And when he found out how rich her father was, he decided to mix business with pleasure. A chance to settle down and make a life for himself would be a fool's errand. And Mason was pathologically lazy, but he was never a fool. Somehow he got through it, and it even kind of worked. In time, Nancy was able to get the thoughts of her past life out of her head, and certainly the woman was certain she would never meet her daughter. She thought it was something impossible and outrageous. Such accidents never just happen out of the blue. They are arranged by fate itself. You can't say that Molly's life turned out badly. The girl spent only a few years in an orphanage and then found quite decent, loving family. The spouses who adopted her could not have children of their own, and this depressed them very much. In the car, they saw their Roldam, Notary, now their little girl. The girl touched them from the very first sight. Not only did they treat her well, but they didn't even tell her that she was adopted. When Molly was adopted, she was still very young and could not remember her parents. That's why she never even thought that her mom and dad were not her family. They were the closest people to her. Thanks to them, Molly was able to get a decent education and find a job. If not for her foster parents, there is no telling how her life in the orphanage would have turned out. Molly never imagined that her own grandfather was a millionaire, nor that she had a brother and a mother who had abandoned her at birth. After studying all the information given to him, James decided to talk to the nurse, who was so kind and courteous to him. Molly stood out favorably from her colleagues, who silently administered injections, did their job, and, after politely saying goodbye to the patients, left. She was very kind and warm-hearted. People around her felt cared for and warm. James was not at all surprised, that Polly had a family. In the documents that Benjamin had given him, there was no information about the girl's fate. But when she told him about her mother and father, he immediately realized that the parents were adopted.
He didn't want to go into someone else's family and rake up the past. He realized that he was very guilty in front of Molly. This pinching feeling was overlaid with the disappointment of his daughter and grandson, and after talking to Molly, who was the exact opposite of these two greedy, lazy genes in human form, the man seriously considered leaving his entire fortune to Molly. Immersing himself in his own unhappy reflections, the man became more and more convinced that she deserved an inheritance like no one else.
And certainly more than careless daughter with idlers, husband and son, who will let his money in the wind, barely over the old man has time to slam the lid of the coffin. James finally made what is probably the most important decision of his life, but he didn't want to tell Molly. Then he'd have to tell her everything he'd learned, the whole story of her birth to this day in her life, from beginning to end. And he felt that he had no time for such a long explanation. After finding out Molly's full details for a fee, he asked for a notary to be invited to his room, much to the nurse's surprise. "Why?" she asked. "It's unnecessary excitement. Can't you waste your energy?" "Thank you, Molly." "Thank you," whispered the old man, "for your care, for your kind heart. But I really need to see a notary. I'd like to do it as soon as possible." Molly had no choice but to fulfill the request of James. The man asked not to coordinate this visit with the other doctor. He didn't want his daughter and grandson to know about it. In fact, he didn't want to see them either. After everything James had learned, he couldn't imagine looking his daughter in the eye. Luckily for him, Nancy had only played up the concern for the first few days. And when she realized it was serious and long-term, she'd tempered her fervor. Of course, how could she have time to visit her sick old man of a father when she had so many important things to do? Manicures don't do themselves, and eyebrows don't do themselves. She loved beauty so much that she could have opened her own salon a long time ago, where everything would have been arranged according to the highest standards, if she had been a little less lazy and passive and had seen some sense in life, except for the interests and needs of her not visible son. Nancy loved Charles so much. For a reason, by caring for him, she was practicing her sin of youth that she wanted to forget. But in truth, she had never been able to blot out the fact that she had given up on her newborn daughter, no matter how hard she tried. The notary arrived at the hospital the same day, as soon as Molly had contacted him on behalf of James. He could have called him himself. The man had known William for a long time. He had processed many documents through him, including a previous will. But the man really wanted the notary to come the same day, and for that, he asked Molly to lie that he was not feeling well at all. "You see, he's such a busy man," James explained to the nurse when she asked why he couldn't call his familiar notary himself. "If he finds out I'm in good health, he'll probably schedule the appointments for another day." I'd really like it to be today. Yes. What's the rush? Asked Molly, who did not want to lie about the old man's condition. She wished him well, and sincerely believed that words had power and could come true. Molly wished James a speedy recovery and was very afraid to cause him trouble. But he still managed to persuade her to do as he asked. Of course, I'll come right away, William exclaimed when he heard that James was in the hospital. He realized why he had called him, and without a second's hesitation, he set out to see him. Fortunately, there were no urgent matters or men scheduled for that day, so he was able to get off and rush to the hospital. I want to rewrite the will, said James. Barely, William crossed the threshold of his room. Services I pay by wire transfer. Thank God my daughter brought me a cell phone, and I can use my money. What money? The man was indignant. What are you doing? Do you think I wouldn't have drawn up the documents for you like this, without payment? Especially since you are in such a place and in such a condition. When Molly realized that James no longer needed her help, she correctly left the room. The man began to dictate his last will to William. The man, hearing to whom the old man was describing his entire fortune, was slightly shocked. Over the years, the man knew all of James's close associates who were part of his entourage. He had heard Molly's name for the first time, but he didn't show it and didn't ask any questions. Maybe he had taken a mistress in his old age, the man thought to himself with a chuckle. It's none of my business, it's none of my business. After the will was drawn up and finalized, William deviated from the hospital atmosphere, made a very negative impression on the man, and he wanted to leave these walls as soon as possible. James had a feeling he was not going to get out of here. After he had made a new will, the man had only lived for a few days. When he felt a sudden pain in the area of the heart, he realized that it was not for nothing, and this attack he would no longer survive. At that moment, when the old man was already 1 foot in the grave, Molly came into the room to give him another injection. When she saw the man's condition, she panicked. James, what's wrong? Molly exclaimed fearfully. Where does it hurt? Just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to get the doctor. Wait. From the last strength, wheezed the old man. I'm going to die any minute now anyway. But I want you to know, forgive me. Forgive us all. Molly was confused. She didn't know what she was talking about. She wanted to run after the doctor, but the man held her hand tightly. And only after a few seconds, when the old man realized that he was dying, he loosened his grip and, taking out from under the pillow some folded piece of paper, handed it to Molly. She immediately ran out of the room and ran for the doctor. But when the doctor arrived, it was too late. James's heart had stopped. I don't know, mumbled the nurse, not even trying to hold back the tears. I don't understand how it happened. I went in to give him an injection. There was no sign of anything. The doctor hurriedly reassured Molly with such cases during his practice he has encountered more than once. The human heart, like the brain, is completely unpredictable. And if once there has already been an attack, when it will happen again and how it will end, it is unknown. Even doctors can't predict that. The doctor didn't even notice that Molly was holding a piece of paper. He did not care about anything at that moment. The doctor hurriedly contacted the deceased's relatives so that they could urgently come and say goodbye to him before he was taken to the morgue. A distraught crying, Molly still could not move from her seat. She sat on the chair beside the old man, looking at him. Her heart was bursting with pity. But how could it be, James? She wailed. In the time the man had spent in the hospital, he had become one of her favorite patients. She had never had such a warm and friendly relationship with anyone. And now he was gone. She couldn't believe it. Just yesterday, Molly had been talking to him, fulfilling his requests, and today he was lying there with his eyes closed and not breathing. No, of course not. She'd seen people die many times in her career. But for James, she felt a kind of unbearable self-pity. In that moment, Molly realized she was genuinely attached to him. He wasn't like the other patients. When she heard that her father had passed away, Nancy pushed Charles, who was, as usual for others, in broad daylight, and rushed to the hospital. "Come on, get up!" She ranted so loudly that her son jumped up on the bed, raising his heel with surprise and fright. "We're going to pick up old Christ from the morgue." Charles, who had hardly sold his eyes, thought at first that his mother was joking. "Pick him up from where?" he asked. "From the morgue." "Are you sure you're not confused?" "What could I be confused about?" admitted the woman, who couldn't remember where she had put her black dress. "You're just like your father. You don't get it right the first time." "You have to repeat everything 20 times. The hospital just called. They said your grandfather's dead and it's time to pick him up. Let's get ready. And put on some decent clothes. None of your lame, fat, athletic stuff. Black sweatshirt, classic. You've got a suit, so wear that. And don't forget to make a sad face. You're not going to a disco after all." Charles felt sorry for his grandfather. Of course, like his mother, he was eager to get his inheritance, but unlike her, he had nothing to hate James for. The old man had always loved him. He'd always loved his grandson. Perhaps if Charles had grown up to be a normal person, not a lazy and slacker, he and his grandfather would have had a warm, friendly relationship. At that moment, for the first time, he realized that he didn't understand why his mother hated James so much. She, like his father, had lived on his money all his life. He'd never denied them anything. And here, such a fierce dislike, Charles became curious, and he decided to elicit it from his mother. But in return, she received a harsh rebuff. It was the second time in her life when Nancy allowed herself to lash out at her son and put him in his place. The woman didn't expect herself to react so violent to Charles's questioning. "That's it! Enough idle chatter!" "Let's go to the hospital," Nancy shouted. She put on her black dress and got ready so quickly that Charles didn't even realize it. He'd never seen his mother in such a state in his life. No, of course not. He knew she couldn't wait for his grandfather to give his soul to God. But there was nothing left for Charles to do but obey, and they raced to the hospital in a matter of minutes. Nancy did nothing but hurry her son, though he sincerely did not understand what was the hurry. Could they be late? Grandpa was dead after all. All they had to do was pick up his body from the morgue and settle all the questions about the funeral. Mother and son could not even imagine what awaited them at the hospital. When they arrived, they rushed to the room where James was lying to get his things. And they ran into Molly. She was sitting by the empty bed from which the old man's body had long since been taken, reading the paper he had given her just before he died. Went into the room as dazed and fluttered Nancy, barely keeping up with her Charles. Molly didn't even know what to say to them. She realized that they were relatives of the deceased, who had left her his entire fortune without even knowing her. What had dissipated? Risked Nancy, barely crossing the threshold of the ward. What a hospital. The staff's all disorganized. The nurse sits in broad daylight, reading notes instead of working. Get up and pack my father's things. I'm not going to tell you twice. But as soon as Molly raised her eyes to the woman, she stopped talking and stared at her intently. They had never crossed paths until that moment. When the woman came to visit James, there were shifts of 2 other nurses, and he himself had never told his daughter about her. The man rightly felt it was unnecessary. There was no telling what might go through his daughter's mind if she knew that he had discovered her secret. Molly could not be confused with anyone else. She was an exact replica of Nancy, in her younger years, looking more closely into the face of a woman who literally devoured her with her eyes. Molly, too, found common features with herself. In the end, it was she who broke the meaningful silence that prevailed in the chamber. She was tired of exchanging incomprehensible glances, and she would have to inform the relatives about the will anyway. So why not do it now, Molly thought. Sure, I'll get it together now, she said. I'm sorry about that. Just hold on, please. In a few minutes, everything will be ready. Nancy decided to wait for the nurse outside the door. The woman needed to recover from the shock she had just experienced. An uncomprehending Charles took his mother under his arm and, leading her out of the room, sat her down on a hospital bench. Mom, what's wrong? He asked. Are you ill? Can't you see it yourself, can't you? Snarled the woman. Bring me some water. There is a cooler over there. Charles noticed the resemblance too, but unlike his mother, he didn't think it meant anything. Nancy knew everything for certain. She had just seen her daughter, the one she had given up years ago. And James had seen her too. And in all likelihood, she and her son were in for a very unpleasant surprise. It all fits, she thought to herself, analyzing her father's behavior shortly before his death. When James had found out about Molly, he had grown cold toward both daughter and grandson. When they visited him, the man interacted with them so aloofly that sometimes Nancy felt like they were complete strangers. No, he did not settle down and accept that his daughter and grandson were dependents. The man simply found a new relative, who came much more to his liking than the old and long-established ones. But still, for the woman was a serious blow that her father left her and Charles without a penny, and for Molly that she is not his own daughter. To her beloved mother and father. As she was packing her things, she came across the folder that James Vitale had brought. It was lying in the nightstand by the old man's bed, and there was no thought of throwing it away or hiding it somewhere. He knew that the machine would have to find it after his death and study its contents. There was no other way. Nancy didn't even pay attention to the fact that the nurse had spent an hour in the room looking through the documents. Yes, Molly wasn't supposed to go through other people's things, but she was curious about the folder. Karkider. Dodhards. She couldn't help herself, and the mystery of the will was something Molly really wanted to unravel. She had to find out why a complete stranger had given her a fortune. Too much had happened in one day. As Molly walked out of the room with a bag of James's belongings, she suddenly realized how tired she was. But she didn't want to put off talking to Nancy Charles. She had to explain herself to them. Right now, Molly didn't realize how greedy and heartfelt they were. And if Charles was still trying to keep calm when he learned about the will, Nancy was completely out of control at that moment. The woman almost made a public scandal, right in the small cafe where Molly had invited them to have a quiet talk. Such a conversation was clearly not for the hospital corridor, where people were constantly walking back and forth. And the patients lying in the wards, where they could hear what was going on outside their walls, needed peace. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Where the hell did you come from? Crawling out and taking what's rightfully ours. I'm not going to let it go, and I'm going to give you a sweet life. It's my money, and I'm not going to let anyone take it from me. This was Nancy speaking, to her own daughter, whom she hated simply for the mere fact of her existence. She had hoped that the shadows of the past would never appear in her life and disturb her. But she was wrong. And it happened so suddenly that the woman stopped realizing what she was doing and what she was saying. Charles was already looking at the situation more soberly. He was trying his best to calm the raging mother, who was ready to grab Molly's head and tear her apart right there in the cafe. Mom, calm down. He demanded he calm down. People are watching. We're not home. Let's get out of here. You'll meet up later. You'll talk about everything. When you come to your senses and you're ready to have a constructive dialogue. But Nancy wasn't going anywhere. On to the contrary, she was just getting the hang of it. Charles even had the impression that she was enjoying herself. He had never seen his mother so embittered and aggressive. With great difficulty, he managed to get the woman out of the cafe and into the car. On the way, Charles jumped Molly his card, then let her know that he was waiting for a call. Molly was completely confused. She did not know what to do next. And it wasn't just the multi-million-dollar fortune that had fallen on her like snow on her head. It was also about what to tell her parents. And should she even tell her mother and father that she had accidentally learned the whole truth about her birth? After all, if they never told her she was adopted, and there was to so George Sirif Hoa Berter Sirter Kurin Tar Commerçor Tur Cartur. No, Molly was sure that they would be very uncomfortable to find out what happened, and she was right. Right, Molly? We took you from an orphanage at one time, adopted you. But it doesn't make any difference. We always loved you like you were our own daughter. As soon as we saw you, we knew you were our girl, father and mother. What was already there is obvious. Molly had more than enough evidence on her hands. But she was not going to prove anything, just told about the trouble she got into quite by accident and became the owner of a multi-million-dollar fortune. Without realizing it, Molly wanted to consult with her parents, what she should do with all this further, how to deal with the sudden wealth that fell on her head. Her mother was adamantly opposed to her daughter accepting the inheritance, after Molly told her about what Nancy had arranged at the restaurant. The woman had good reason to fear for her life. It was possible that James was a person, and not a bad one, the woman reasoned. But which way to look at it? You'd have to scare your daughter so badly that she'd give up her own child. But Nancy's soul is black, and that can't be changed. She has lived her life, and apparently, in her soul, is still very strong resentment not only to her own father, but also to the man with whom she was close in her youth. If she hates you so much, I'm sure it's not just about the money. And the 1,000,000 is, of course, up to you. But if I were you, I'd give it to them and her son. Let them let them choke on the marm. You don't know what you can expect from them. There was some truth in her mother's words, and Molly understood it. On the one hand, but on the other hand, James, realizing what his relatives were, on the contrary, wanted to protect his money from them. He wrote a will when he was almost on his deathbed. And she's just going to give it all to them, going against the will of the deceased. She doesn't have an old man on her hands. Molly couldn't do that either, but leaving Nancy and Charles in the lurch would be too fraught with unpleasant consequences. It was important to find a compromise, and on reflection, Molly managed to do so. She decided it would be fair to give Nancy half the money. After all, she was his own daughter, and Charles was as much his grandson as Molly herself. To tell the truth, she didn't really need the money. She didn't know what to do with it. Perhaps she could buy the apartment she'd always dreamed of, put some of it in her parents' account. But it was still a fabulous amount of money. Until now, Molly couldn't even imagine a person owning that kind of money. It seemed to her that all these millionaires with huge brick houses behind iron fences are only in the movies, and now she herself was such a millionaire and could have a house of her own. But she didn't need it all. That's not where her happiness lay. Charles had a tough talk with his mother when he got home. His father, who was also interested in returning his late grandfather's capital to them. Therefore, the horse are holy. Yahweh joined their heart-wrenching conversation. The man was in complete shock when he found out what had happened. He did not understand how Nancy could have allowed this to happen, nor what they would live on if they could not reach an agreement with Molly, and she did not want to give them the money. Charles Molly seemed like a nice person, and he was sure that he should not only socialize with her, but make friends with her. Even if she decided to keep all the money, though it was unclear why she needed it, he reasoned to himself, she put in or weir wouldn't be able to abandon the daughter and grandson of the late James to their fate. At least, she didn't seem like the kind of person who could do that. Charles thought so, and he wasn't wrong, though he'd initially encountered his mother's resistance when they discussed further tactics for dealing with Molly. "Are you out of your mind, son?" Nancy was outraged when Charles said that Molly should be called, and that she should be the first person to call to say goodbye to her grandfather. "I don't want to see her, do you understand? And why are you suddenly so fond of your sister? She has her own family, and we have our own. And we're nothing to each other. And you are not forced to love her? And your mother is related to her," Charles exclaimed. "But whether you like it or not, we have to accept the fact that she has our grandfather's will in her hands, and in 6 months she will have the legal right of inheritance, and will become the sole owner of his entire fortune. And we'll be left with nothing. Is that what you want?" Charles didn't seem at all embarrassed by the fact that her mother had an abandoned adult daughter. He reacted so calmly to the news that the young man felt uncomfortable. Of course not. As an heiress, Molly interested the man, or rather, he cared about how to pull away her grandfather's money. But the mere fact of her existence did not move Mason at all. What was there any daughter of his wife born in youth from unknown person? He wasn't too interested in his own son, not even Molly. What could he care about some strange girl? Mason was only interested in money and nothing else, nor was Nancy ready to stop in her determination to get back her father's inheritance, which she was convinced belonged to her by right. She had endured too much for that old lever. He had, in fact, broken her life. And should she yield his capitals to some damsel she had not seen since she was born? The woman had absolutely no feelings for Molly, and no maternal feelings to speak of. She was a total stranger to her, but Charles Nancy did catch some common sense in her words. He was right, and she should not have spoken so harshly to Molly. On the contrary, she should have been on good terms with her. It would give her a much better chance of getting close to her grandfather's unfairly protected capital. But it was all taking too long, and Nancy was not prepared to wait. So she came up with her own cruel and sophisticated plan, which she intended to put into practice as soon as possible, and did not inform her husband and son and share with what she had planned. Nancy decided to do everything herself. After all, it was her money, and she was her father's sole heir. No Molly should stand in her way, but temporarily, not for long at all. She will have to win in front of her and even apologize. It's what's necessary for the cause, nothing more. The woman had set her sights on getting her father's money back and planned to achieve it as soon as possible. Nothing and no one could stop her. And the first thing she did was ask Charles to contact Molly to invite her to the wake. Just like he suggested. "Maybe we could meet beforehand to talk about it," Charles asked. "I don't feel comfortable doing this at a wake." "Yes, but what's the point?" Nancy shrugged it off. Who needed Molly to come to a wake where there would be a lot of people? One-on-one meetings wouldn't do her any good. The woman was far from stupid and would never do anything like that. As a result, Charles agreed with his mother and was ready to call Molly. But he suddenly realized that he didn't have her phone number. That's exactly what went through his head. "I left my number, and she gave me hers." "No? Oh, shit. Luckily, Molly called herself. She didn't want to postpone a difficult conversation and was ready to tell her newfound, sudden relatives about her decision. "How nice of you to call," Charles exclaimed when he heard Molly's voice. "I've been meaning to talk to you. But I didn't have your number." "I thought about coming to the hospital." "That would be unnecessary," Molly replied. "I'd really like to meet you and Motherpara and your mom and talk to you, if that's possible." Charles said that Nancy would not be able to meet her in the next few days because she would be busy with the funeral arrangements, and said that Molly could come to say goodbye to James and talk to her mother after the wake. "I don't know if that would be appropriate," Molly laughed. "But okay, if your mom is comfortable with that, then so be it. I'd really like to say goodbye to James myself." I think he was a good man. Yeah, I really loved Grandpa Tao, Charles lied. It wasn't until after he died that I realized how dear he was to me and how much I would miss him. As they say, we can't keep what we have, that's for sure. Molly sighed. They parted on a friendly note. And when Molly announced that she would give Nancy and Charles half of James's fortune, the young man rejoiced. Was he right about Molly, and she turned out to be a good person? But he didn't know what his mother was up to. And when he did, it was too late. Pray she lives, Charles whispered, sitting outside Molly's hospital room. He had no doubt that it was her mother who had poisoned her. Fortunately, Charles had caught on in time, and seeing Molly's condition, had called an ambulance. Once again, Charles was in the wrong place and confused Nancy, just like when he took Grandpa to the hospital. It didn't save James, but it was possible to get Molly out, and the doctors were doing their best to make it happen. Nancy had planned everything in advance. The woman was categorically not satisfied with half of the inheritance, which she would also have to receive from some girl from the bar's shoulder. She wanted everything, absolutely everything. That's why she decided to take such a desperate step. Nancy convinced herself that she had no other choice. There was no other choice left to her. If Molly had refused the inheritance, it would have been, in the woman's opinion, quite fair. But this way, you can't prove anything, Nancy whispered back. There were so many people there. She could have been poisoned by anyone. And the food might not have been fresh enough. Things happen in life, you know. We're all under God. But Nancy miscalculated. Doctors immediately diagnosed Molly as being poisoned by a specific drug, which was later found during a search of the house. It was a real blow to the woman. She didn't expect to be found out, and so quickly. She was indeed lucky that Molly had survived. If she had died, Nancy would have had to spend the rest of her life incarcerated. As it was, the sentence the court had given her was perfectly acceptable. Of course, Charles hired his mother a lawyer, even though he didn't want to absolve her. He couldn't abandon her. He constantly visited Molly and apologized to her. Charles was truly ashamed of his mother, and he repented for her act. Of course, he was not a gift himself. Lazy, spoiled, money-loving, willing to do anything for them, but not murder. It was too much even for him. Nancy's obsession knew no bounds. She'd go to any lengths to get her father's money. It's bloody money, Molly whispered when she found out why she was in the hospital. If I'd known she was capable of such a thing, I'd have given every penny of it. For nothing. I don't want that capital at that price. Poor James. He must be turning in his grave. Mother will spend many years in prison, sighed Charles. Of course, thanks to the fact that you were alive, she didn't deny it and confessed to everything. The sentence was reduced, but not by much. She won't be out anytime soon, so you don't have to worry about that. Charles has already made his decision. As soon as Molly inherits, he will take his share, and he and his father will move to another city. He'll visit his mother, of course, but he can't imagine how they'll be able to communicate after everything that's happened. And you still take a part of grandfather's inheritance, convinced Charles Molly. If after all these years he found you by chance, then it was necessary. I'm sure he would have wanted you to dispose of them properly, and he'd be very offended if you refused to accept his gift. Only for James's sake, Molly sighed. Charles kept his word, and as soon as he got his share of the inheritance, he left town. The unemployed father did not even argue with his son, but silently accepted his decision. Molly, on the other hand, spent James's protected money on charity. She is the only one of his relatives who regularly visited the old man in the cemetery. From time to time, Molly had the urge to talk to her grandfather, to tell him what was going on in her life. Even though their troll and Holly had known each other for a short time, she had grown attached to the old man. From everything that happened, Molly drew one conclusion. It was better to live modestly than to have wealth for which relatives would kill and cut each other's throats. Strangely enough, James came to the same conclusion. By the end of his life, when he was lying in a hospital room, he had only ever thought that he had not lived his life in vain. If he had left behind greedy hyenas in the office dock, from the form of his daughter and grandson, who were ready to do anything for that money. A thunderstorm was rumbling over the city. The rumble and rolls of thunder frightened Korat with fear, huddled half under the sofa. Heavy raindrops, drums, or windowsills. Camille stood at the window and stared out into the darkness. There were exactly the same trickles running down her face as on the glass. When Korat once again forgot and rushed to the sofa, the girl shouted at him, "Fool! What are you afraid of? Sitting here in a warm apartment. And the storm? It's out there, on the street. Stop chickening out." Such a big dog, as if realizing the words of his mistress, Korat pressed his tail and slightly commanded him. Guiltily, the girl came to her and rubbed him behind the ear. Stephen lingered. He had been delayed more and more lately. And Camille realized that in the last month of her pregnancy, she had become less attractive to him, but she needed his support now more than ever. They were not married because they both considered a stamp in their passports a useless formality. Could any stamp be a symbol of true love? A child is another matter. When Camille found out she was pregnant, she was over the moon. She and Stephen had just started their life together. Camille came from a small town where she lived with her grandmother. She did not remember her parents. Her mother died when the girl was only 3 years old, and she never saw her father. In the metropolis, the girl hoped to start a happy life. She entered the culinary school without much difficulty, and after graduation, she got a job in a small restaurant. It was there that she met Stephen. The guy liked the pretty and cheerful girl at once. He took care of her for a long time, bringing flowers at the end of each shift. For not spoiled by male attention, provincial girl, such romantic gestures seemed something fabulous and unimaginable. Camille fell in love almost immediately. The feelings were mutual, and the young people began to build a relationship. Camille lived in a small apartment in the suburbs, which she rented with her friend. The friend often brought guys to visit, and rarely when they were the same as the last time. Camille didn't judge Vanessa's behavior because everyone had the right to live the way they wanted. But she did not feel comfortable living in such an environment. When Stephen suggested moving in together, she agreed without a second thought, even though that they had only been dating for 4 months. Camille was a good cook, so she immediately decided to start spoiling her beloved with delicious food. Stephen liked it very much. The guy was earning well, so he offered Camille to quit her job and fully devote herself to the household. And she was only happy to make the house cozy. After all, Stephen was so pleasant to return every evening to the place where he was loved and waited. They lived like that for 3 more months, and then Camille saw the cherished 2 stripes on the test. All day long, she sat on pins and needles, awaiting for the return of her beloved Stephen. When the girl told him the news, the guy was very happy, picked her up in his arms, and circled her for a long time. Camille was happy, and everything was fine. But lately, Stephen had been distant. He came home late, ate in silence, and went to bed. Sometimes he even forgot to kiss her. The girl associated such behavior with her position and loss of attractiveness. Attempts to bring her beloved to a serious conversation did not lead to anything. Stephen explained that now work was taking a lot of energy. But Camille felt that it was more than that. And now he was delayed again. The girl was worried about the storm. The wind outside was so strong that a couple of trees in the yard even had a few large branches broken off. I hope he's okay, she thought, peering into the darkness. I haven't seen a storm like this in a long time. Maybe Stephen is just sitting in the office, waiting out the storm? That's exactly what I'd do if I were him. Finally, she heard the sound of the lock opening. The town barked happily, welcoming the owner. Here I am! A familiar voice came from the hallway. What a watering, Stephen! Camille exclaimed joyfully, coming out to meet him. I was so worried. What are you? The guy grinned. You can't be worried in your position, huh? How could I not? You were supposed to be here at 6 morning. It's almost 10 here, and you've got a lot on your mind, you fool. Stephen put his arm around Camille's waist and stroked her belly. Oh, can you feel her like that all day today? She smiled. The baby inside her stirred again. I think it will be soon. It's about time. All right, don't worry. You'll feel better in a little while. Well, I don't know how much better. Camille frowned. Stephen, honestly, I'm so scared. Scared of being a mom? Come on, because you and I can do this together. I love you so much. Camille pressed her whole body against her man. You must be hungry. Did I cook in there? No, honey. We ate at the office. The guys ordered delivery. I'm sorry. I seriously didn't know when I'd be back. Okay. Well, the girl's a little upset. Why don't I give you a bath? 'Cause you're soaking wet. I could use a hot bath. Leaving Stephen with the dog, Camille went to give the boy a bath. When the water was about halfway up, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. The spasm repeated itself. Camille fell to her knees and was soon treated for the pain. Stephen, she screamed. What took you so long? Resented the guy, peering into the bathroom. Shaza, here we go! Puzzled, Camille said. Shit. Even the water broke. Now wait! What do I do? Camille looked at him fearfully. Can you get dressed? Come on, go to the hospital. I can't. Camille screamed in pain. So stay here for a while. I'll call an ambulance. I hope they will come quickly in such a threat. Stephen quickly contacted the control room, explained the situation, and helped Camille to lie down on the bed. The contractions were recurring more and more frequently. The girl was in pain and scared. The minutes dragged on endlessly. Stephen was panicking no less. He did not know how to help Camille and only stroked at her arm. After about 40 minutes, the ambulance crew finally arrived and asked how often the contractions were recurring. They put Camille on a stretcher and took her to the hospital. Stephen followed. The delivery went smoothly. After only 3 hours, a healthy baby girl was born. When the baby was brought to her mother, Camille was already recovering a little. I gently took the baby in her arms and put them to her breast. Stephen was allowed to enter the room. When he saw his daughter, the boy smiled, though his face was still very frightened. Look how much she looks like you, Camille whispered. But be quiet. I'm so afraid of disturbing her. Oh, God, Stephen replied in the same whisper. What miracle, huh? Am I a father now? Yes, darling, answered Camille tiredly. This is our daughter. The boy stood mesmerized, watching his little girl, nodding quietly. Yes, and suddenly said Camille, you have no face on you, and it's so late. Go home, go to sleep, we'll be here. Camille spent the next 3 days in the postpartum ward. Stephen never came to see her, citing a heavy workload. Even though Camille hated it, she understood. After all, the guy had to make money. Vanessa came to visit her a couple of times, bringing fruit. Don't worry, her friend comforted Camille. Your Stephen's not going anywhere. So what if he works? You'll live better now than you did before. All your time will be spent on the baby. Men work all the time. That's normal. You'll get in shape and everything will be fine. Of course, a pregnant woman can make a man's desire for a baby go away. And it's not just the loss of physical attractiveness. Think about it. You were cranky. And in general, he found an outlet in work. A distraction, so to speak. You think Camille doubted it? It's just that lately I feel like he's gone cold on me. No, he's not. Is that normal? How would you know? You've never even been in a normal relationship. It's psychology, Vanessa said with an important look. You'll see. He'll crawl on his knees in front of you and apologize for being so unattentive. Vanessa Mayo! Sat, I kind of were... Got hopper to get it, but it's just a stupid feeling. It's just postpartum jitters. I hope so. Now I'm worried he won't be able to meet me because of his job. Oh, woe is me. You're on your own. Cabs have never been canceled. And don't get yourself worked up. By the way, when you're discharged the day after tomorrow, I'd come to you myself so you don't have to worry, but I've got a new boyfriend at the cottage. Vanessa, come on, go and don't even think about me. What if you do something serious this time? I wish, said her friend dreamily. There's such a man there, it's amazing. It would be a pity to lose him. So hold him tight, and I'll try to calm down. It's just so hard to wear me down when I'm pregnant. Why haven't you named your daughter yet? Steven said he'd come up with one himself. It's very important to him. But I've already named her Emily, to be honest. It's a beautiful name. All right, you rest up, friend. And I'll stop by when I get back from the cottage. Right? I almost scolded Emily and Steven for being so indifferent. He's such a workaholic, isn't he? You wouldn't know it from him. Come on, Vanessa, have a good trip. On the day of discharge, Steven did not answer the phone, although he had promised to meet them from the hospital the day before. Camille began to worry a lot. She had always been an alarmist and assumed the worst. What if he had an accident? The girl was nervous. Where to call in such cases? Right. Camille guessed to call Steven at work. Good afternoon, she greeted the girl who answered at the other end of the line. Can I hear Steven Filippov? Oops, caught the girl. And he doesn't work for us anymore. How strong is that? Camille was surprised. A long time ago? He quit 3 months ago. What can't be? He didn't tell me anything. I'm sorry, who are you? I was Camille, but suddenly I ran out. Sorry, goodbye. She hung up the phone at a complete loss. Camille had never imagined that things would turn out this way. Of course, Steven might not have told her that he'd quit, so that she wouldn't worry. But in that case, where had he been all day? She made several more attempts to call the guy, but each time she got an answering machine. Camille left him a message, but and he still hadn't called back. There was nothing to do. She would have to check out and go home alone with the baby. The worst thing was that Camille had no keys to the apartment, no money, and no card to order a cab. When labor started, she had no time to pack anything. And Steven had not brought her anything, promising to pick her up from the maternity hospital. When Camille was handed the baby girl, she hugged the girl tightly, and picking up her bag, went out into the lobby. There was no crowd. She sat for a few minutes, rocking her sleeping daughter in her arms, and then went outside. It was a warm summer day. There were people scurrying around everywhere, looking at their happy faces. Camille cried. She didn't know what to do. Taking the bus with the baby seemed like a bad idea. She didn't even know how to get home. She stood there in tears, afraid of waking the baby. Camille did not know how much time had passed. She sank helplessly on the bench and pressed the girl to her chest. Her thoughts drifted away. Camille did not even immediately realize that she was being addressed by a man, a girl, and a girl. The stranger shook her lightly by the shoulder. Are you all right? Do you need any help? Why, excuse me? Camille snapped out of her oblivion and looked at the stranger. Expensive jacket, thin gold-rimmed glasses. Clean-cut look. The man was in his 50s. In his hair, silver gray.
I apologize for invading your space, the man continued.
Are you crying? Sitting here alone with a baby? Obviously, something's happened. What's it to you? Through her tears, Camille replied. I can't pass by someone who is in trouble. The man smiled softly. Camille felt a little ashamed that she had been harsh with him. My name is John. And you? Camille. The girl was embarrassed, but responded with a handshake to the outstretched hand of her interlocutor. It's a miracle, John nodded at the little girl. She has no name yet. Well, it's on the paperwork. I named her Emily. Stephen, Camille burst into tears again at the memory of the boy. I can see that you, dear Camille, are in some kind of trouble. It's not hard to guess that it has to do with a certain Stephen. A man sat down next to me, showing that he was ready to listen to the story. Unfamiliar girls. Pardon me for imposing. I realize how it all looks from the outside, but maybe I can help you? No one can help me. She sighed deeply, holding her baby even tighter. Honestly, I don't even know what happened. So much so that I was discharged from the hospital. And Stephen is my boyfriend. He is. He's disappeared. I don't have any money or keys to my apartment. And he's not answering his cell phone. I don't know what to think. Stefan quit his job, but he hasn't told me anything. And I don't know if he's lying to me or if something's wrong. There's been something going on with him lately, but I haven't noticed because I'm pregnant, and now I have to get home, and I don't have money for a cab, and that's the problem. John raised an eyebrow. Let me give you a ride. It's not that hard. I have a car. How far is it to Verniski? I'd take the bus, but I don't know which route goes there from here. Come on, Camille. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't cry. I can't thank you enough. Come on, it's nothing. John took Camille's bag and walked her to her car. The luxurious black SUV gleamed brightly in the sun. Camille had only seen them in pictures. She didn't know the make of the car, but she knew at once that it was worth a fortune. Come on, make yourself comfortable. John opened the back door, revealing a cozy light interior. Camille was even scared to sit on such expensive leather. I'll support the baby. I promise not to drop my word of honor. There was such warmth in John's tone that Camille held the baby out to him without a second thought. She got into the car, and John immediately gave her the baby back to her and got into the driver's seat. It's a beautiful car, Camille complimented her. It's just a means of transportation. John laughed. I rarely drive it myself, but sometimes I want to drive it. I decided to try out a new toy today, and I was so lucky. Otherwise, I wouldn't have met you. I live nearby. My sister works at the maternity hospital. Where'd you get discharged from? I dropped off some things for her. I came out and saw this beautiful girl crying. How could I pass her by? Thank you so much again, Camille said quietly, afraid of waking her daughter. If it hadn't been for you, I would have sat there on the bench at a complete loss. Well, that's a pretty bad boy you've got there. I hope he had a really good reason for not coming. I don't know. Camille shrugged. The most important thing is that he's okay. There's my house, 3rd driveway. And when John parked in the designated spot, Camille looked around. The yard was frowning, and Stephen's car is parked here. Why isn't he picking up his cell phone? Did he fall asleep so soundly that he forgot about everything? Can I help you up? No. The girl shook her head. I'm going to the 2nd floor. You see the balcony with the statues. Beautiful flowers. Yes, I grow them every summer. My grandmother's favorite. Camille stopped talking, remembering the wrinkles. A kind face. Well, I'll be off. Thanks again. You're welcome. It's such a small thing, laughed John. Be happy. Camille got out of the car and headed toward the entrance. She rang the intercom for a long time, but no one answered. This worried her, because judging by the car, Stephen was at home. He didn't even walk to the nearest store. She waited until a woman came out of the entrance and ducked inside. Climbing up to the second floor, Camille felt that her legs refused to go. Her whole body was shaking, and the girl could not cope with it in any way. Pressing the call button, she listened for a long time, but not a sound came from the apartment. Even Korat didn't bark, though the dog always barked when the doorbell rang. After standing like that for a few minutes, Camille called the neighbors. Almost immediately, a buried woman in a pink robe opened the door. "Who do you want?" she asked Camille. "Excuse me, I live next door. My boyfriend won't open the door." "What's that got to do with me?" the woman asked unhappily. Maybe you've seen him or know when he was last home." A deep thought process was reflected on the neighbor's face. "You mean Steven, don't you?" "Oh, Camille, I didn't even recognize you. Where's the baby from?" "Well, I was discharged from the hospital today. Steven's disappeared. I guess he's not home." "Car's outside, though. Maybe he's out walking his dog?" "No, I saw him yesterday." "I think so. He was walking with some girl last night. A tall, tubby one. Didn't even say hello, even though we literally bumped into each other." "I was just going to the store." "Not anymore. I didn't see him." "Are you sure?" "Did something inside Camille snap?" "Quite sure," the woman nodded. "And you don't have a key. You've lived here a long time." "It was quick. I didn't have time to take anything. The keys are at home. We don't even have anywhere to go right now. Is Steven not answering his cell phone?" "Well, I can't invite him over." "I'm sorry. I'm not alone." "So, no. Camille shook her head. "I wasn't asking. I'm just really worried." "What if something happened? If you see him, please tell him I've been discharged. Tell him to call me." Just knowing that they're apparently having a thing with that girl. How do I explain it? He put his arm around her like that. Well, not exactly modest. "No," Camille hesitated. "You must have imagined it." "Well, I'm sorry to bother you again. I'll be off. Tell him if I have to, I will." The neighbor nodded and closed the door. Vera stood outside her apartment for a while longer, but no one came to the door. Tears flowed down the girl's cheeks again. The only person she could go to now was Vanessa. But her friend was out of town. The spare keys to the apartment were in the purse Camille had left at home. Realizing the hopelessness of her situation, Camille slowly began to descend, hoping with all her heart that the baby would not wake up soon. As if sensing her mother's excitement, the girl began to move. "Hush, hush, my joy! Bye-bye!" hummed Camille. Feeling on her lips bitterly salty taste of tears, she stepped out of the entryway, thinking that it was a waste not to ask for the number of that kind man who had her entryway home. Looking up, she found, to her surprise, that John's car was still parked in her yard. "I knew it." With regret in his voice, he said, approaching the girl with the child that was not at home. "God, I'm so glad you didn't leave," Camille exclaimed joyfully. "I don't know what to think. I called and knocked and got no answer, even though his car was right there. And Steven always drives. Always. And a neighbor said she saw him with some girl last night." "I think so. I got it." "Camille, why don't you get in the car? We'll figure something out." Already in the car, the girl slowly began to come to her senses. The girl in her arms was still fast asleep, but Camille felt that she might wake up at any moment and ask for food. "Camille." John turned to her as they were leaving the yard. "Tell me, do you have somewhere to go?" "I have a friend, but she won't be back for a couple days. I don't have a key to her apartment, and my grandmother. But she lives very far away in another city." "Then, listen, I can offer to rent you a room in a hotel for a while, but I think it won't be very comfortable with a child there. So let me take you back to my place. Stay with me for a couple days until your friend gets back. Especially if Steven shows up. Life happens. It would probably be very inconvenient, Camille tried to refuse. It's inconvenient to leave a mother with a newborn baby on the street. I have a big apartment. I don't live alone with my wife, but my son and daughter-in-law live with us now. While the house is being built, they won't be bored and scared, I promise. But how will they feel about the fact that you brought a complete stranger into the house, and even with a child? Is that okay? You're not worried about it. My wife is an understanding person. I think she'll be okay with it. Honestly, Camille frowned. It's not very embarrassing, and besides... Yes. John looked at her seriously. Besides, I don't have anything, baby. And you're talking about diapers? We'll stop by and get everything. But so no buts, girl. I have the desire and opportunity to help you. It's just silly to refuse. Camille did not argue, although all the way she tried to understand what made this man come up to her and offer help. When John came out of the supermarket carrying a couple of huge bags, Camille had no idea where they were going next. The SUV was carrying them down the noisy highway to somewhere out of town. Camille, don't be frightened. I live in the suburbs. I moved out of the city a long time ago. It's very picturesque. It's a big house, so you won't bother anyone. Camille only nodded silently. She was nervous and wanted to sleep more than anything else. Quite quickly, John drove them to a small cottage village. Judging by the mansions that stood there, the people who lived there were not simple. The houses, tucked in gardens behind wrought iron fences, were adorned with lush stucco, and expensive cars were parked almost everywhere. The air smelled of pine trees. How delicious it smells here, Camille exclaimed enthusiastically, breathing in full. You bet it does, John replied proudly. And there are relic pine forests all around. We can go for a walk afterwards. Evelyn, my wife, often walks in the woods. She even has her own trails. And it's perfectly safe. And there are lots of landscaped glades. How great! And I was in Sosnovi Boro about 5 years ago, when I was still at school. My grandmother wouldn't let me go into the woods alone, but I was sneaking around anyway. Well, here we are. The car stopped at the beautiful wrought iron grates, the patterns. It was so ornate and filigree that Camille at first even thought that the gate was killed by some unknown plants with black leaves. The lattice slid smoothly aside, after which John drove into a large courtyard. It was paved in cobblestone. Some of the stones were covered with soft green moss. The small house, which Camille at first mistook for the master's house, turned out to be an office, where the guard station was located and the staff lived. The main house stood at the back of the garden. It was a magnificent 3-story building of dark brick in the English style. One wall was completely covered with ivy, and in front of the main entrance and hid in the sun, a graceful fountain. Wow, ahead Camille when she saw the house. Now that's what I mean. A palace. It's not a palace. You should know, Camille, how much effort, exactly how much effort and money it took to build it. I don't need a place like this. It was Evelyn who insisted. A family nest for a big family. But in the end, my son was born only one. He doesn't want to live with us. So he got married and is living with his wife in an apartment. Now, we've decided to build our own house. And here, we have only earrings and dolls. Why did we build all this? I would give anything to live at least for a short time in such a house, Camille sighed dreamily. Nonsense! I'm offering you a free pass to stay here as long as you like. I know it seems strange. Some guy drove up, took me to a place I don't know where, and offered to let me stay with him for free. Yes, Camille nodded. Very strange. And I never would have said yes if it hadn't been for that. That's it. Don't think bad thoughts, John said in a soothing tone. Let's go and meet the household. The inside of the house was still more luxurious than the outside. Is there anyone here? Shouted John. A brisk clatter of heels came from upstairs. Faith looked up and saw a woman coming down the stairs. It was a real beauty. A fragile, precise figure, high-cut hair, blacked, as with moths, hair and huge eyes, Camille stood as if paralyzed, cradling the still sleeping baby girl. "Oh," said the woman in a ringing voice. "You, darling, I see you are not alone, and less frequent. Let's get acquainted. This is Camille and her daughter, Emily. And this is a beautiful young lady, my wife, Evelyn Gennadyevna. You can just call her Evelyn," the woman said softly, looking at the guest from head to toe. Camille felt a strong embarrassment under the gaze of deep gray eyes of John's wife. "Well, Camille and Emily." "Welcome, Evelyn. The girls are in a bit of a bind, so they'll be staying with us for a couple of days. Please help them get settled in. Baby's gonna wake up soon." That's how Evelyn raised one eyebrow. "All right, come on, sweetheart. We have a spare room. I let the maid go, so we'll have to set it up ourselves." "Of course," Camille replied, fearfully. "I'm not even. Don't be afraid. It's not embarrassing. All my husband is a good man. If he brought you here, he must have had his reasons. And I'm certainly not going to find out what they were, unless you want to talk about it." The thought occurred to Camille that the woman might think John had brought a mistress and child into the house, but she dismissed it, realizing that women like Evelyn were not unfaithful. And John was quite sane. The woman led Camille upstairs. They walked down a long corridor and entered one of the rooms. The first thing that caught their eye was a huge window, almost the entire wall. The bedroom was spacious, bright, decorated in pale yellow hues. "Wasn't it, Evelyn?" "Look," Evelyn began. "It has its own bathroom, so I don't think you'll have any trouble bathing the baby and such. The bed's quite comfortable. Unfortunately, we don't have a crib, so you'll have to sleep together." "What do you mean?" Camille was embarrassed. "I've never seen such a luxurious bedroom in my life. Of course we'll sleep together. Especially since I'm only coming to stay with you for a couple of days. Squinting. Evelyn. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" That's when the baby woke up and screamed for food. "Oh, I'm sorry, Camille. I got distracted. I'm feeding Emily now." "Of course, Sweetie, I'm in no hurry. If you need a bath, towels and robes are there. Feel free to take what you need. I'll leave you to it. When you're ready." Downstairs, when Evelyn came out, Camille was breastfeeding the baby. As she unpacked the bags, she found not only diapers, but everything a newborn needed, including clothes. This surprised her greatly, since it was John who had made the purchase. I guess when John and Evelyn had their son, it was the father who did the shopping, thought she knew what to get and what not to get. Interesting man, and his wife's a little too benevolent for the rich, too. I never thought that people who have a lot of money, which is obvious from the house, could be kind and just take in a homeless person with a child. I can't take advantage of their kindness forever. I can't wait to get Vanessa back so I can go back to my grandmother's house. What happened at Stevens? He dumped me. I have to call him anyway. I don't understand anything. It's too weird. Even if he dumped me, couldn't you talk to him instead of making me hope for something? Or did he just get cold feet? Camille was buying up Emily. I changed her into a cute onesie that was among the purchases and put her to bed. The girl fell asleep very quickly. Like a kitten, the young mother smiled. Just ate and went straight to sleep. I'd like to take a nap myself. Camille went to shower, and a soft terry cloth robe lay next to her daughter. She fell asleep instantly. She was awakened by the baby's crying. Camille fed her again, rocked her a little in her arms so that she fell asleep again. After getting dressed, the girl decided to go downstairs. She quietly left the room and quietly headed for the stairs. A young boy, apparently the son of the owners, was walking towards her. "Hello," he said, looking at Camille in surprise. "You must be our guest." "Hello." The girl was embarrassed. "Yes?" "My name is Camille. I am Christopher." Smiled the guy. "Where's your daughter?" "I put her to bed." "I don't even know if I can leave her alone, but it's probably not a good idea to carry her around someone else's house." "What? You're afraid of disturbing someone?" "Don't worry. Everyone here lives on their own. Nancy's at work. She won't be back until tonight. Dad's away on business, too, and Evelyn's mom is downstairs in the kitchen cooking. It's weird. I can't remember the last time she was at the stove. If you want to talk to her, you go downstairs, and after the stairs, take a left. Don't get lost." "Is your house that big?" "It's no use," Christopher replied in a somewhat detached manner. "My parents built a family nest, but Nancy refuses to live here. She and Mom have, what do you call it, a difference of opinion? No, they love each other. But if they start running the place together, they'll fight. We're building a house too, but a smaller one. I always wanted to live in one, but no. Would you like me to watch the baby for a while?" Christopher suddenly suggested it. "Nancy and I are going to be parents sooner or later." Of course, if that's what you want." Camille agreed. "Come on, I'll show her around. Can you call me by my first name?" "It's kind of wired when a girl my age treats me like an old man." "Good," smiled Camille. "And you too, then." They went into the room where tiny Emily slept in the middle of a huge bed in a nest of comforters. Christopher quietly approached the girl and looked at her in silence for a long time. "Camille, listen, of course, it's none of my business." "But where the father of the baby? I do not know," shrugged the girl. "No, I don't mean I don't know who he is or where he is. It's just that Stephen is missing. He didn't come to meet me from the hospital. He's not at home. If it wasn't for your dad, I don't know where I'd go." "What do you mean?" Christopher was surprised. "You mean he just didn't show up? How long have you two been together?" "1.5 years. But now, apparently, he just left me without any explanation. He didn't want a baby." "That's the thing, he did. That's why I don't understand. The last time I saw him was right before I was discharged. Everything was normal. No sign that Stephen had decided to leave us. And now, the neighbor said he brought some girl home with him. That's it. I need to find out for myself. As soon as my friend gets back, I'll go to her place and do it. Why wait and wait for someone? First of all, you can stay here as long as you need to. Secondly, I don't have much to do right now. I can help you find your Romeo." "Yes, it's a bit awkward to ask that." The girl hesitated. "What's the big deal?" "It's not difficult for me even now. I wonder what made that fool do such a thing." "Go for a walk and around the house, and I'll sit with the girl. If she wakes up, I'll call you right away." "Thank you." Camille nodded and left the room. She wanted to talk to Evelyn. Camille still couldn't believe that these people were willing to help her in a completely unselfish way. What if they were up to something? No, not likely, but still. What if this Evelyn is crazy? I've heard they're very good at pretending to be kind and compassionate. Who's gonna look for me? Especially here, it would be easy for such people to commit a crime and get away with it. If they wanted to take my child away from me, they would just kill me or, at best, make me a slave and make me clean these hundreds of rooms. And I can't even escape. There are so many guards. Camille walked into the kitchen, where Evelyn was working at the stove. The woman turned around, and immediately a wide smile appeared on her face, showing off her flawless teeth. Camille even flinched. "Honey, are you awake?" I came into the room. The new ones and the baby were sleeping so sweetly that I didn't dare to disturb them. "What about the baby? I met your son on the way in." He offered to babysit for a while. Christopher loves children. He's always asked for a sibling, but it's never worked out. And she's not going to be a mother yet. The girl's got a career as a designer. Honestly, I wouldn't worry too much if I were her. A belly doesn't interfere with her painting. So you and Camille tell me, is Emily a desirable child? Of course, said the girl. I'm amazed at the directness of the question. We both really wanted a baby. It seems they both did. I spoke to John. He said your boyfriend has disappeared from the horizon without a trace. Camille, I'm sorry to be so blunt about this, but I need to understand who's in front of me to decide whether or not to help this person. I'm not John. He's the altruistic, unimaginable altruist. Evelyn, I take no offense, Camilla replied firmly. I'm in a stupid situation, and I can't tell if I'm stupid or if I just don't know something. But I need to figure it out for myself before I jump to conclusions. Stephen and I haven't been together that long, and we're not officially married. But when he found out he was going to be a father, he was very happy. Or pretended to be. Now, I'm not so sure about anything. He worked a lot, often stayed late, because we had to earn money to support the child. Only it turned out that he had quit his job 3 months ago without telling me. And then the neighbor said she saw him with some woman. I'm not stupid. I can put 2 and 2 together. I just can't understand why he would do that. Emily's his daughter too. How could he just cut people out of his life like that? He knew I had nowhere to go. All my stuff was still in the apartment, and I wouldn't be lost. At the very least, I'll go back to my grandmother. All the more reason to have arms and legs. Getting a job again will work out somehow. Why did he do that? Could it be that he's trying to get back at you? Is this man jealous? No way! Camille even laughed. Who's jealous? How did I start living with him? He left work, and I was always at home. He knew my every move. Vanessa was the only male friend I had left. It was out of the question. Stephen was jealous, of course, but I never gave him a reason. Why should I take revenge on him? Oh, a man can have strange things going on in his head. No, if that's what you think, it's not worth pursuing. Then it's all trivial. He found someone else and decided to leave in English without saying goodbye. Then he's just a bastard. And you or Evelyn should be glad you got rid of him so easily. So easily, yeah. Camille was surprised. But now I have a child I can neither support nor educate. What makes you think that? Children are a happiness to bring up. You'll be fine on your own. I can see from your communication that you're an adequate woman. Even this whole situation would be another tear. Are you calm? Not like a boa constrictor, of course, but in control. Evelyn, Camille laughed. I was wondering why you're helping me. I always thought that people like you preferred to stay out of other people's troubles. People like us, laughed the hostess. What kind, I wonder? Well, the rich. Camille looked away. Girl, sighed Evelyn, money is no indicator of indifference and callousness. My husband, you know. You'd better talk to him yourself. But in a nutshell, he travels a lot, and he loves India the most. When he first went there, he was lucky enough to meet these people. In general, they completely turned his view of the world upside down. He often helps the underprivileged yet. Almost always, people are to blame for their own misfortunes. Almost. Sometimes circumstances are such that there's nothing a person can do about it. Like you, for example. Of course, you can berate yourself for naivety, inattention, stupidity, after all. However, could you have known that the person you love, Rosaro, would turn out to be a hypocrite? So he played his role well. And now it's up to you. The way things turn out, getting out of this situation entirely in your hands will be difficult, but nothing is impossible. And if someone like John can help, why not? There's just not a lot of people capable of selfless acts these days. Few, I agree, Evelyn nodded. but there are some, and you were lucky enough to meet one. You're not trying to find a catch? There isn't. You're probably thinking to yourself that you're in a lair of the insane. But I can see by the look on your face that I'm right. Yes, Camille was embarrassed. To be honest, I had those thoughts. So, sighed Evelyn, understand, everything that happens is not just an accident. If John hadn't gone to his sister, he wouldn't have met you and your daughter, wouldn't have offered to help, and God knows how things would have turned out. But it did happen. So, you just have to move on with your life, learn the lessons, and try to see the whole picture. For example, do you have any thoughts on what you're going to do next? My friend's coming back day after tomorrow. I'm going to stay with her for a while. We used to work together, but I moved in with Steven and left that place. What did you work as? Cook? Camille blushed for some reason. It's my specialty, but I really enjoy cooking. Ah, Evelyn smiled. So you gave up your favorite business for your family? It turns out so, she sighed. And now you're thinking of going back to it? I don't know how to do anything else. I just don't know how I can combine it with a child. I have no money even for the first time. Vanessa won't leave me on the street or let me starve, but I can't sit on her neck for long. That's why the best solution is to go back to my grandmother in the province. I'll get a job at some canteen or diner there. I'll leave Emily to her. Do you think she'd like that? Evelyn squints. I doubt it. I don't have the best relationship with my grandmother. She wasn't too happy when she found out I dropped everything and started living with a guy. I don't have any parents, or my mother died, and I never knew my father. My grandmother is my only relative. She'll understand anyway. But there's also the possibility that she'll say no. Camille, listen. Evelyn's brow furrowed. How about this? Well, I'm looking for a cook right now. We had a woman working for us, but she had to leave for family reasons. I can't cook at all. Can you appreciate my culinary delights? With these words, Evelyn tossed a plate of pancakes to the batter. John only comes home in the evening. I don't eat much. Christopher works from home, so he's always hanging out in the kitchen. If I offer you a place and lodging, you'll accept it. Ah, really? Camille looked at her hostess incredulously. But you don't even know how good a cook I am. Better than me, anyway, laughed Evelyn. Of course, I can find a high-level cook, but what's the point? We don't need any culinary masterpieces. Normal and tasty home-cooked food is on the table. It's ideal. Try it if you like it. I'll pay good wages. How about this? We can cook dinner together now. If everyone at home likes it, you can start work tomorrow. But what's bothering you? What, there's no one to take care of the baby? That's not a problem. And she'll get him a nanny. While you're busy in the kitchen, she'll watch the girl. Is that possible? Camille was very surprised. Why are you even suggesting this to me? I don't think I'm up to your family's standards. Aren't you afraid? A good cook is the key to my family's health and good spirits. And I have a feeling you're exactly that. My intuition never fails. And even the whole situation is so that the cook himself came to our house when we need him. I'm very willing to accept your offer, Evelyn, especially given my circumstances. But it's still too tempting. I used to be skeptical, suspicious. I didn't believe in people or in people, but John let me see the world. On the other hand, he always gives people a chance. It doesn't matter if they are relatives, subordinates, partners, or complete strangers. And he became an example for me. Of course, I don't know anything about you, but for some reason I feel I need to make you an offer and you need to accept it. All right, Camille nodded. Let's cook dinner. But I'll tell you right away, I haven't lived up to expectations. Confidence is one of the main keys to success. That's just my opinion. But it's your lack of confidence that could have caused your problems. Camille made a roast and a couple of salads. Evelyn didn't help much. preferring not to interfere, but kept a close eye on everything the girl did. Now, when everything was ready, they set the table together. So looked around the dining room at the hostess. John will be right back. I can't say about her. We'll have dinner without her. Here I am. John entered the dining room. What smells so good? Evelyn, did you make something eatable for once? Don't be sarcastic. The woman smiled. Maybe I did. Sit down at the table and I'll go while Christopher calls. So, Camille? Have you settled in? A little, John asked, sitting down at the table. Yes, she answered a little apprehensively. We had a little talk with Evelyn. I calmed down. She must have been broadcasting to you what a great man I am. The man laughed. Camille was serious about that too. To me you are. Stop it. I did the least I could do. Evelyn and Christopher entered the dining room. The boy sniffed the air and seemed pleased. I haven't had a roast in a long time, he said cheerfully. That's what it smells like. Nancy probably stays out late on purpose to keep Mommy from eating. And it turns out he's missing a lot. Let me show everyone, Camille suggested timidly. The cook's right to giggle Evelyn. Is that how you, Evelyn, cooked it? Surprised, John? Yes, here's to it, she said modestly. I hope you enjoy it. When did the family start dinner? Camille received a lot of compliments. Everyone enjoyed the food very much. Evelyn sat and looked slyly at the girl, who blushed profusely, but seemed very pleased. What had Camille said to the hostess as they cleared everything off the table together? I guess I wasn't wrong. An agreement is worth more than money. John and Christopher are not likely to eat anything else now. Huh? I know them. I'm glad you all enjoyed yourselves. Go get some rest. The dishwasher will be fine. And your daughter's waiting for you. As Camille fell asleep, she tried Stephen several more times,
but he still didn't answer the phone. In the morning, Camille was awakened by a light knock on the door. She did not immediately realize where Evelyn was. Evelyn whispered, peering into the bedroom. Are you still asleep? No.
Evelyn, replied the girl, rising up on the pillows. Camille, I invited the nanny. She's already here. So wake up. I'll introduce you. And you can trust her with your daughter. Wendy is a very nice woman. She used to babysit Christopher. Okay, Camille nodded. Give me 5 minutes. You can take your time, Evelyn smiled. Camille got ready even faster. Emily consulted peacefully in her pillows, although her mother had to feed her a couple times during the night. The girl was starting to cry. Here I am, Camille smiled, coming downstairs where Evelyn was already waiting for her, in the company of a pleasant older lady. Meet Camille, huh? This is Wendy, you might say, our friend of the family. Where's the baby? Wendy asked in a high-pitched voice. Is she still asleep? Camille was embarrassed. The women talked some more, and then the nanny went to the bedroom to check on her new charge, Camille. You may go about your duties, and don't worry about anything. You may prepare breakfast as you wish. No one here has any special preferences. You can make coffee in the coffee machine. I'll show you how it works. It's true, John drinks, but can you make the brewed figures? Sure, Camille nodded. I don't know if he'll like it or not, but I'll try. Evelyn showed her where the food and utensils were. Then Camille immediately began to prepare breakfast. The girl deftly on heat toasted puff jars and even boiled porridge with berries. The coffee for John she prepared according to her own specialty recipe. When everything was almost ready, an unfamiliar girl flew into the kitchen. Don't tell me you're the goddess who cooked last night's dinner, the girl said cheerfully. I'm Christopher's wife. Nice to meet you, Camille, Camille replied, embarrassed. You can talk to me easily. I'm not Aunt Evelyn, who's all high and mighty. No, I didn't think so. Evelyn is a very pleasant woman. Pleasant, I'll grant you. But when it comes to her favorite son, She can be a real demon, trust me. So if you're gonna start a billet in this house, the first person you need to please is Christopher. He'll be pleased. We'll all appreciate it. That's how I thought he liked it last night. You bet he did. I ate it myself, warmed up, came home late. I put extra on it. I don't eat much, especially in this house. I don't have time to cook for myself. Even now, I'm already too busy at home, so a couple of pancakes for a snack. It looks delicious. And I'll run. One by one, all the household went downstairs and had breakfast. Even John was very pleased with the coffee Camille made. It's delicious, Camille, he said. I usually boil my own, but yours is even better. What's the secret? Camille laughed honestly. I boil it the way my grandmother taught me. I just add a little salt and black pepper. That way the flavor is off and it's more interesting. Oh, interesting. A long time ago, I used to drink coffee just like this. It's so strange to try something like that again. You could see in John's face that he was lost in his memories. Do you know, Evelyn? Would you like me to tell you why I came to you? No, of course not. And any other woman in that situation, I would have offered to help. But you reminded me of someone I used to love. Before I met Evelyn, I was with a woman. Are you anything like her? When I saw her, I thought for a moment I was seeing her again. Well, of course, there's no way you could be her. She's about 45 years old now. By the way, she was the one who told me the same coffee. It's so weird. What happened to her? Camille asked. Do you remember her so fondly? I can see that. As life went on, I loved that woman very much, but I had to leave for a long time. John sighed heavily. When I came back, she wouldn't even talk to me. No matter how hard I tried, it was all to no avail. I left, hoping that one day she would forgive me. But alas, I don't even know where she is now. And then I met Evelyn. Christopher was born. The past slowly let go of me. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Being abandoned is hard. It was wrong of me to leave her back then, but deep down, I always hoped she'd forgive me. I guess I can forgive Stephen. What he did was despicable, but I don't want to hold a grudge. That's the right thing to do. You girls got your whole life ahead of you. You got a baby now. Live for you and her, not for some shady man who doesn't want you. I'm not judging anyone. But you are the only person who will be there for you until your last breath. Learn to love yourself, and then everything will work out. Without that, you'll be a victim of circumstance forever. Thanks again for the coffee. I'm off to work. I'll look forward to dinner. I'm glad you took Evelyn up on her offer. This house has never produced such a delicious and simple home-cooked meal. It makes one think of the ancestral nest again. Thank you, John. Camille smiled. Vanessa, hello, said Camille cheerfully when she reached her friend. Camille, what are you doing? Where did you disappear to? I went to your place yesterday. No one answered the door. The phones are silent. Did something happen? Vanessa, so much has happened. I don't even know where to start. Why don't you meet me and tell me all about it? I can't yet. Anyway, I got a job. So what about the baby? I can't believe Stephen agreed to babysit. He works too. He doesn't work anywhere. Stephen turned out to be a real asshole. He just disappeared. He didn't pick me up from the hospital. And I had no money, no keys to my apartment. I just stood there with Emily in my arms and cried. If it hadn't been for John, I would have been left on the street. John was wary, Vanessa. Don't think anything of it. He's a very decent man. Anyway, he took me in for a couple days. I thought I'd be gone when you got back. Then I'd stay with you for a while and go back to Grandma. But things worked out the way they did. This is a very rich and friendly family. When they found out about my situation, they offered to stay and cook for them. I said yes. Uh-huh. And? Does it pay well? I have no idea. It's enough that they give me a roof over my head and food. And Emily is looked after by a nice woman, the ex-nanny of the master's son. Nanny, you say? Real well-to-do family, apparently. They live in a town like this. Even the flies have a pass. Wow. So, what? You're locked up there and you don't get a day off. Vanessa, don't be ridiculous. I'm working my third day just for now. It's probably too early to ask for a day off. And I can't come to you either. I'll ask the landlady. I don't think she'll mind. Tell me something. You were in my apartment. I mean, his apartment. And no one answered the door? You know, I thought someone came to the door, but they weren't going to take it, and I heard the dog. The midget must have smelled me, but he wasn't allowed to bark. Understand? Camille's thinking. I don't care what Steven says anymore, but I'd like to get my things, my papers. I won't even show him my daughter. I could go with you, but he wouldn't open the door, obviously. Okay, I'll think of something. Thank God you're okay. I was so worried. Yeah, thank you. How did you manage to win the man of your dreams? Oh, I'll tell you all about it later. It's better than great. I'm glad. Camille smiled. I'm going to make dinner. I don't want to spoil my impression of myself. Goodbye, dear Camille said goodbye to her friend and went to check on her daughter. When she turned around, she saw Christopher slumped up against the railing. Oops, shuddered the girl. I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was here. Camille, stop apologizing. I was just walking and didn't mean to interrupt. Seeing that you're on the phone and it's me who should apologize for being an unwilling listener to the conversation. Say, do you need any help? Let me take you to your old apartment. Get what you need. Are you crazy? You don't need that. Actually, you should at least get your passport. Your mother will give you an official license, right? And you should probably go to the registry office to get a birth certificate. Otherwise, you're living here like illegal aliens. But how? Steven won't open the door. I don't know how to get into the apartment. It's very simple. He's the one who won't open it for you. If he sees that you've come with a guy, he'll calm down. He'll realize that you've probably already found someone else and you're not in the mood for a scandal. You'll get your papers quickly and we'll leave. And if he doesn't open up, we'll just call the police. There are neighbors who can confirm that you lived there, right? Of course, Camille nodded. Then let's go. Wait, I probably can't leave the house that easily. I have to make dinner. It'll wait. Mom doesn't eat during the day, and I'll be in town with you for a snack. No, I can't do that. I'm getting paid to do this now. Why don't I make it quick and then we'll go? I'll do that, especially since I doubt Steven will be home at this hour. There's a better chance of catching him tonight. Oh well, call me when you're ready. Camille made quick work of preparing dinner, but then the girl was distracted by her daughter, giving Wendy a rest. She couldn't go with Christopher until after dinner. Evelyn approved of her son's idea. When Camille and Christopher drove up to the house, it was already beginning to get dark. There were lights on in the windows of the old apartment. I think he's home. Camille pointed to the windows. That's great. Let's go to the intercom. They didn't ring the doorbell. When Camille got to the second floor, she didn't dare to call for a long time. Christopher did it for her. A dog barked at the door, sensing her mistress. Steven, open up! I know you're home. Enough already. I don't want anything from you. Just give me my papers. No one answered, although Camille heard cautious footsteps. The dog was barking. Steven, if you don't open up now, we'll call the police. Suddenly, Christopher said. Camille at the door, hoping that the ex-boyfriend would be frightened by the noise made and still approve. And so it happened. The door opened as far as the chain would allow. Stephen's face appeared in the gap. "What do you want?" he mumbled. Camille answered him, and Christopher saw tears welling up in her eyes. The guy realized that she was about to pay and pushed the girl aside. "Look, Stephen, you've been a real asshole. But it's certainly not my problem. And the girl's her stuff, and live your life as you please." "Who the hell are you?" the ex-boyfriend asked with a sass. "Suppose it's definitely none of your business. But I'll tell you now, Camille is under my protection from assholes like you. And since you didn't bother to explain to her what's going on, I'm not going to bother explaining anything to you. Let's just get the papers and go." Camille stood trying not to breathe. She could hear Corette barking somewhere in the back of the apartment. Locked him in, she thought. I hope he doesn't hurt the dog. She didn't want to interfere with the conversation. The mere sight of Stephen crying pitifully behind the chain was disgusting. Stephen locked the door, but opened it again a couple minutes later, holding out to Christopher a small folder and a woman's purse. "Here's everything. If you need things, you can come back tomorrow and I'll pack everything. I don't need anything else." "Don't hurt the dog," Camille said, and started down the stairs. "You can forget about your daughter. And if you ever want to see her again, you'd better put that thought out of your mind." Stephen shouted something after her, but Camille did not hear what he said. Camille had been working for the John family for almost a year. All the family loved the girl and her little daughter. Emily was already crawling, and Wendy was not the only one who did not sit with her when Camille was busy in the kitchen. Evelyn wasn't reluctant to babysit the girl either, and Stephen Camille didn't remember. She knew from Vanessa that her ex-boyfriend had a new girlfriend who was running his apartment. But even that information was unnecessary for Camille. She simply cut this man out of her life, not wanting to remember him and especially not to dig for reasons for his behavior. She was simply not interested. Now Camille's life was filled with new meanings. Her daughter was growing up fast. Camille did not want to miss a minute of her life. Therefore, having coped with her duties, immediately ran to the baby. Camille liked her job. It was pleasant and not difficult for her to prepare food for this family. Evelyn paid for the girl to take a cooking course with a famous chef. "Girl, understand," the lady of the house told her passionately. "It doesn't mean we don't like your cooking. Everything is wonderful, but you realize that working in this house is not the limit. You have potential. The girl will grow up. You'll have a lot of free time. Don't you want to branch out and say, open your own restaurant someday?" "Evelyn, where would I be before a restaurant, especially my own?" Camille replied skeptically. "What's the big deal? You've been with us for a year and we've had guests more than once. You should have seen the looks on their faces when they tasted your dishes. Many of them have never dreamed of such things. Of course, they're used to eating in good restaurants, but that they don't have any soul. Yours is different. And if you take my idea seriously, which I recommend you do, I'll talk to John. I think he'd be interested in investing in you." "How so?" Camille was surprised. "Very simple. We'll ask him to lend you money for a little restaurant. You'll do it the way you want to do it. No one will interfere or impose their opinion. You hear me the way you want to hear me. Somehow I believe you'll succeed. I made sure you got your first clients. I think a lot of people we know will be interested. What if it doesn't work out? What if the restaurant doesn't pay for itself?" Camille hesitated. "I can imagine how much money that would be. To open your own place, even if it's small." Evelyn reassured her. "Let's not let you worry about that." "All right, fine. It's up to you to say yes. I'll leave the rest to me, please." "Evelyn, I don't know how to react. It's a very serious matter." "It's not serious. I say how much you enjoy cooking." I know you deserve better than to be in the kitchen all day in our house. And it's up to you to provide a decent future for our little girl. Camille was pleased that Evelyn called Emily our girl. Sometimes she thought that the lady of the house seriously considered Emily her granddaughter, though the status of grandmother was not at all compatible with the appearance and character of this remarkable woman. Anyway, sweetheart, Evelyn went on, you think about it. And I'm in no hurry. But never once has my advice hurt anyone. In fact, everything around us now is because of me. If John hadn't listened to me, I dread to think where we'd all be. I'll think about it. Honestly, I had a dream once, but it was impossible to realize it. Nothing is impossible, Evelyn summed up, drinking her coffee. Camille really wanted to see her grandmother. She often called her granddaughter and urged her to come with the baby. Jenna had never seen her granddaughter in person, only by video link. The woman was happy that Camille was well settled and doing what she loved, but Camille didn't know how to ask for a vacation. One evening, she was sitting in the kitchen watching Emily play, and there was a look of concern on her face. John, who had come in for a snack, noticed it immediately. He said to her, "What's bothering you?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Camille began to apologize out of habit. Apologizing again. How many times do you have to feel guilty? You've become like family to us. Speak up, I can see that something's bothering you. Let's be honest, I miss my grandmother a lot. She called again yesterday and asked me to come over. And what's the problem? John's brow furrowed. It's not like we're keeping you tied up here. You've been working for a year now. You've never asked for a vacation. You don't even take a day off. You can't do that. Well, there can't be any. But we're all human beings. It's okay to take vacations. Go to her tomorrow and don't think about us. We'll live for a week. We won't die without your violin. Now, it's true. My faith has shown. Of course, if you want, I can even take you. I thought you said she lived somewhere in the region. I have a free day. Will they take you and the baby? In comfort. It's been a long time since I've traveled behind the wheel. And when I was young, I drove all over the country. That was my job. I'd be happy to do it. If you're not joking, of course. Camille agreed happily. It's a deal. Go pack your things, and we'll leave in the morning. Camille immediately took advantage of the offer. So great was her desire to see her loved one. Camille had not seen Jenna for a long time. Her grandmother was ill, so she rarely went out. And Camille herself, drawn into the family life, could not afford to be away for long. Stephen was not particularly happy when she stammered about a possible trip. As promised, John was ready in the morning to give the family a last meal. Camille collected Emily and walked out to the car. John was already sitting behind the wheel. The girl was comfortably seated with her daughter in the back seat. That's what the man said. You didn't tell me where we were going, or it might turn out to be the Far East. I'd like to be back by tonight. No, Camille laughed. What Far East? My grandmother lives in Small. It's only about 150 kilometers from here. It used to take me a couple hours by bus. Small? John, I'll tell you how to get there. No, you don't have to, the man smiled. I know where it is. I used to go there a lot when I was young. You did? Camille was surprised. She noticed a strange, sad smile on John's face. Really, he sighed. I've even lived there before, but not for long. Wow, the girl was surprised. Who would have thought it? John drove the car very carefully, but even with this, they reached the car quickly. On the way, the man again voiced the suggestions Evelyn had made earlier.
So, Camille is thinking of going into the restaurant business? Oh, the girl was embarrassed. Did Evelyn tell you everything? Husbands and wives can't have secrets, the man grinned. So I'd really like that, Camille admitted. If you want it for real, then we'll make the best of it. If you already have some ideas, I'll tell you. I can show you a couple of nice rooms later. Onishenko will help with the interior. Oh, that's great. The girl almost clapped her hands. But I'm a little apprehensive. I have no idea how to run a business. There's nothing complicated about it. If there is a head on your shoulders, all you have to do is to give yourself to the process with all your soul, leaving all the organizational aspects to the experts and just cook.
The car drove up to a 5-story brick house on 2 entrances. "And this is where your grandmother lives?" John asked strangely. "Yes," Camille nodded. "I grew up here." "It's not the most decent house, but it's a very nice house," John said with longing in his voice. Camille found John's behavior strange. It was obvious that everything in this small town aroused some strange emotions in him. "Will you come upstairs with me?" Camille asked him. "I'm afraid of embarrassing your grandmother, but I'll help you lift the bags and the Johanska, and you carry the baby." They got out of the car and headed for the entrance. Camille rang the intercom.
It was opened immediately. They left her downstairs and went up to the 4th floor. There was no elevator in the house. On the way up, Camille noticed that John's face had changed considerably. There was a look of confusion on his face. When they reached the apartment, the man looked at the girl strangely. The door opened almost immediately, and a short old woman stood on the threshold. When she saw Camille, the woman cried. She rushed to hug her granddaughter and kiss the little girl. My little girl was crying. "Jenna, how nice to see you." "I didn't even dream about it anymore." "Why are we on the doorstep?" "Come quickly." It was only then that she saw John. But the woman froze for a moment, staring into his face. "It can't be," she said at last. "John, was it you? Camille?" Who didn't understand. She looked at her grandmother and then at John. Tears were streaming down the man's face. He was silent. That's how Jenna came to her senses. "Come on, get inside. There's nothing to stand on the landing." When everyone was inside, Camille finally asked Grandma, "Grandma, you two know each other, don't you?" But from where? Only now, she began to realize that John was not just experiencing all these emotions of some incomprehensible nostalgia. "Do you know each other?" Jenna looked at the Mier. Near? He stood still and could not cope with the shock. John did not stand still. Come into the room. The man obediently followed into the room. Camille noticed that he knew exactly where to go. She left Emily with him and went to help her grandmother with the bags. "Evelyn, tell me, do you know who this man is?" "Of course I do, grandmother," laughed Camille. "This man is my savior and employer. He made me believe that there is a place for miracles in the world." Jenna squinted at her, "And now I'm wondering how you know him and why you're talking to him so easily." "He said he used to come here a lot, but I didn't realize it was such a small world that you two would be old buddies." "We're not old pals," Grandma sighed. "You know, I'm not at liberty to tell you that. You'd better ask him yourself." "I will, but not now, later." "And I'd really like to talk to him myself, to be honest. This whole grandma thing is really weird." "Okay, let's go meet Emily. She hasn't said anything yet, but I think you'll find her interesting."
Camille watched John. He was playing with the girl, but it was obvious that the man was very excited. Jenna sat next to him and was also visibly nervous. That's it. Couldn't stand it. "Camille, I have a right to know what's going on here. If you need to talk, I'll go for a walk."
"But then you will tell me everything." She quickly collected the girl and left the apartment. For a walk for about 40 minutes. Camille came back. Emily was falling asleep in the stroller, and the girl hurried into the house to put her to bed. She carefully laid the girl on her old bed. Almost nothing in the room had changed since she had left a few years ago. Even her mom's pictures still hung on the wall the same way. Slightly stiffened, Camille machine-corrected the picture and stepped out. Jenna and John were already waiting for her. Camille couldn't tell from their faces what the conversation was about. Lyra. John started first. Swear. Please, I have something very important to tell you. Let me leave you two alone, Grandma said, and headed for the exit. Jenna looked at her. Man, don't go, please. Are you sure? Well, what's your game here? And she looked at John and her grandmother understandingly. Camille. Sit down, sweetheart. John patted the couch next to him. We're going to have a long talk. Camille obediently sat down beside him and prepared to listen. Once upon a time. With a deep sigh, the man spoke. No, offer, not like that.
25 years ago, I was sent to work here as a young specialist. At that time, I was a promising designer of oil equipment. And a decent oil field had been discovered in Small. The corporation I was working for was in charge of the development, so I jumped at the chance. No competition. Not a lot of people were willing to move up here from their big city jobs. I had nothing to lose. Besides, I had experience to gain. I got a room at your grandmother's. So that's it, Camille exclaimed. That makes sense. Without interrupting, John continued. Jenna, there's a desire to be alone here, you know. Your mother, Molly, was not thrilled with her mother's decision to rent out one of the rooms to a strange man. Was she as old then as you are now? I can imagine the emotions I evoked in her back then.
Well, Molly didn't like me right away. She realized that a tenant could at least make up for the plight the family was in during those bad times. But she couldn't control her emotions. She was always giving me all sorts of petty trouble. One morning I caught her in the hallway, carefully cutting the laces of my shoes with a razor blade. So as not to wake Jenna, I whispered to her, and she whispered back. It's ridiculous to make excuses. The situation was so ridiculous that soon we were laughing out loud. That's how we started to become friends with her. Molly quickly changed from anger to mercy. She made me coffee in the morning and walked me to work. It became so commonplace that I didn't realize I had fallen madly in love with her. Molly reciprocated. Even Jenna didn't mind. And everything went well as long as my contract was in effect. When I finally got to go to her place, your mom wouldn't let me in. She wouldn't even open the door for me. But I was persistent. I got her to come down to my yard, and we had a long talk in that funny fungus on the playground. She did not forgive me, swore that she had fallen out of love, and found herself a new man with whom she is happy. And I, the fool, believed it. She said it all with such rage. Only now I realized that it was all a lie, and she was just waiting for me to launch her from her heaven to earth, to finally honor her with my presence. I argued fervently at the time that I was only doing it for her. But the fact that she'd confessed her feelings for someone else made her cool down. I didn't want to interfere with her happiness. What could I do? I didn't even think she was lying or hiding anything from me. Why didn't I stand up for myself then? Why didn't I go to Jenna? Now I blame myself more than anything. Come on, Grandma Molly said in a soothing voice. She'd made her choice, and she hadn't said anything to me then about your coming. If only I could have. But, so I don't understand anything. It turns out it was 20-odd years ago. Where was I? Now, Camille, we're going to talk about you, John sighed. You see, your mom didn't just lie about the new man. She didn't say anything about you, and I didn't know anything, nothing. I don't understand, the girl frowned. What is there to understand? The man laughed nervously. Molly was pregnant when I left. She probably didn't even know it yet. And then I disappeared. And she was all alone. I don't know why she didn't say anything to me when I called, or if she was afraid of distracting me or losing me. Either way, she was wrong. But when you were born, I had no idea that my daughter was out there somewhere. Daughter? Camille questioned. A daughter exactly, Jenna. But why didn't you make any attempt to contact me? You knew my number. Molly forbade me to talk to you. She thought you were with another woman and just cut you out of her life. I was married to my job at the time, and I was madly in love with Molly. You should have known how I felt, Carol, that I couldn't rise to the level where I could provide her with a decent life. But there was no explaining that to her. Oh, if a woman harbored a grudge, it was useless to try to make contact. Molly was too proud, and Jenna. But when she died, when you were left alone with a small child, couldn't you have called then? You think I didn't call? Even remembering my daughter didn't stop me from doing it. Alas, your number had already changed. I just didn't know where to find you. I thought you'd come back one day. And as you can see, I was right. So wait. Camille's come to her senses? Are you saying John is my father? Yes, Camille. That's exactly right. John sighed and rested his face in his hands. But I have a completely different person on my birth certificate, the girl exclaimed. My mom always said my dad died before I was born. Why would she tell you the truth? Perhaps she would have done so one day when you were older. But alas, we'll never know. No, it just can't be. Camille was stunned by the news. Remember, I told you that I approached you at the maternity ward because you reminded me of someone. You look a lot like your mother. I kept marveling at how much alike people can be. If only I had known then, things would have turned out differently. Camille, I'm sorry, but I really had no idea. It's just crazy. Camille jumped up from the couch and started pacing back and forth across the room. No, I don't believe it. You're confused. She jumped out of the room, quickly put on her shoes, and ran down the stairs. John shouted something to her from upstairs, but Camille didn't seem to hear him. She ran out of the entryway and walked quickly, not seeing the road. She had to get her thoughts together. The sky had been cloudless up to that point. The clouds had thickened. Distant rumblings of thunder could be heard. Camille walked on, unable to see anything in front of her. When the first drops of rain hit her face, she lifted her face and looked up into the black sky. A flash of lightning blinded the girl for a second, and at that moment, everything fell into place. It was as if Camille woke up and realized everything John had told her. The rain intensified, and the girl, who was wearing only a light dress, was instantly extorted through. She ran through the puddles back to the house. There was John standing in the driveway. He, too, was already soaking wet. He seemed so funny to Camille in his gold glasses and his expensive jacket against the shabby front door that she laughed. Camille, come on inside. You're a sheet in a thunderstorm, shouted the man. The girl was crying. The tears running down her cheeks mingled with the sawdust the raindrops. She ran up to John and hugged him tightly. They stood in silence. Camille could feel the man's heart beating fast and loud. Even louder than the thunder was coming at them from all directions. It doesn't work like that, she sobbed. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible. The girl stroked her head. John, you know, like Evelyn says, she's always right.